Webs of Deception. Chapter 1. False Truths. Sasuke walked slowly through the crowds of Konohagakure, his hands deep in his pockets. He kept his unfocused, emotionless eyes forward, expertly blocking out the lust-filled gazes and the heated glares directed at him. They were a part of his life that he didn't want to acknowledge. Nothing but a single thought that only increases in ignored emotions as time goes on. It's been 6 years. The solemnness in his mind, nothing but jagged slivers of what was. Of what used to be Team 7. When the cell was an actual team before what kept them together left for a mission and never returned, leaving a gaping, tattered, and dank hole where once held his heart. He admitted to himself, when he was younger, that he had fallen in love with his male teammate. His dope. He was just drawn to that bundle of energy, to the other's bright personality. Even if half of it was only facade, the other half wasn't. The half he frequently saw was purely the dope. Naruto eased his loneliness with his unique friendship. He actually saw him, not the last surviving heir to the Uchiha clan. He acknowledged who he was and acknowledged his strength. He was his best friend and rival. Then in one night that changed everything, he became his lover. Those few hours of passion that he would never forget. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't erase the events from his memory. This made the blonde's disappearance tear far more brutally at his heart, snatching what was left of him and leaving him as an empty shell with nothing left to hold on to. Soon after Naruto disappeared, Sakura and himself were entered into the Chunin exams with a new teammate named Sai. He was meant to replace Naruto, but for Sasuke, nothing would ever be the same without the blonde boy. And the way Sakura reacted, he knew she felt the same. It surprised him, really. Sakura took Naruto's disappearance pretty hard. She cried for weeks because she seemed to blame herself for not being nicer to the blonde. Quickly after that, her fangirl crush dissipated. If the blonde's disappearance affected Kakashi any, he didn't show it. Well, he didn't show it in front of his remaining students anyway, but he was always the first to volunteer to search for Naruto. Yet, each time Kakashi returned, he returned with the same response, destroying a little more of Sasuke's hope each time. During the exams was when he first met Orochimaru and received the curse seal. Then a couple of months later, he defected from Konoha and went to Odo. Nobody bothered to try to stop him. He hadn't really expected any of them to. There was nothing left in him to care either way, because there was nothing left for him in Konoha. Not anymore. The one person he fell in love with was gone, making Konoha a mere shell of what it used to be, just like himself. Now, he steeled his heart away behind unbreakable walls which protected him from the pain he knew was still lingering just beyond the steel barriers. 3 years later, he had become stronger, thanks to Orochimaru's strenuous training. Too bad, though, he had no intentions of letting that snake take over his body in any way. Not when it already belonged to someone else. He killed Orochimaru and Kabuto with techniques that the two taught him, which gave him some satisfaction. After that, when he began to travel around, he debated with himself on whether to return to Konoha or find and kill his brother, Itachi. It was that small nagging hope in his heart that guided his feet back to his home village, only to learn quite quickly that Naruto wasn't there. Nor has there been any sight of him either. That knowledge, though, wasn't what sent the steel walls around his heart crashing down and let the excruciating pain to stab sharply through his heart. What sent his walls crumbling like rice paper was the fact that Konoha had put Naruto's name on the memorial stone, confirming that he would never see the blonde ever again. And for the first time since the blonde's disappearance, he cried. He cried out the pain and loss he'd been holding in for the past years. After returning, the punishment he received was a year of house arrest and then another year of probation after that. The Godame Hokage wanted to have him executed, but the council members wished to keep the last surviving member of the Uchiha clan alive for breeding purposes. That was a laughing matter to Sasuke. He had no intentions of ever rebuilding his clan. He couldn't even imagine touching anyone else. It only caused him to become nauseous. Though the council didn't need to know that, since if they had, the old fools probably wouldn't have been so lenient. Over the next few years, he worked up to become an Umbu captain, hardly ever seeing nor speaking with Kakashi or Sakura. As for the rest of the Rookie Nine, Team Guy and half of the shinobi ignored him like the plaque, like he was on the verge of betraying the village every day. This didn't bother him in the least, sending the term Ice Prince to a whole new level. He only spoke with others when it was necessary and ignored everyone else. Trying not to think of the past, he arrived at the training grounds and was about to start practicing his aim when a bare-masked Umbu appeared to his left. He took a small glance over at the Umbu, recognizing immediately that the person underneath the mask was Hyuga Niji. Taicho spoke Niji in a low and even tone. "Hokage-sama wants to see you in her office." He then disappeared, already knowing he wouldn't have gotten any kind of response from him. Sasuke placed the kunai he had taken out back into his weapons pouch, then disappeared from the grounds and reappeared in front of the Hokage's desk, where Tsunade, the current Hokage, was writing on an outstretched scroll. "You wanted to see me, Hokage-sama," he said flatly without any emotion. Tsunade didn't answer or even acknowledge his presence, not until another person appeared in the office. This person happened to be his ex-teammate, Haruno Sakura. Her bright pink hair was pulled back in a tight bun with the strands framing her face, and she was clad in her Umbu uniform with her mask hanging from her hip. "Ah, good," said Tsunade with her attention fully on Sakura. Her dislike for him was well known throughout the village. "I have a mission for you two." Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Sakura glance over at him and send a small glare his way. The two had stopped getting along after Naruto disappeared, and since he betrayed the village, they got along even less. More like not all. "What kind of mission, sure show?" Sakura asked, also ignoring his presence. "I want you two to hunt down and give this scroll to Tatsuo and his team," indicating the scroll she was presently writing on. "You mean the dangerous mercenary team, Akuma?" Sakura asked with disbelief resounding in her voice. Tsunade nodded her head, not lifting her gaze from what she was writing. "Yes, I do. With the war that is going on, I need their help." "Do you think they'll actually help?" The Hokage lifted her head then and gave the pink-haired Kunoichi a knowing smile. "Yes," she said, "because Tatsuo has a promise to keep." All the while, Sasuke remained silent, barely listening to what the two had to say, which wasn't really a big surprise since he preferred it that way. His mind was fully on a memory of a previous meeting when he actually met with this Tatsuo. Within a dense forest miles away from Konoha, a 15-year-old Sasuke was heading back to Orochimaru's hideout after a short mission that he was assigned to. His pace was slow, apprehension about returning to the presence of that snake settling in his stomach. He stopped and focused his eyes in front of him, the presence of 5 shinobi heading in his direction. He wasn't worried, though. This was just another opportunity to become stronger. A moment later, the group emerged from the trees and stood in front of him. All 5 were wearing identical black cloaks with different animal masks like the Umbu covering each of their faces. From left to right, they stood side by side. A dragon, a dog, a fox, a weasel, and a tiger. Something fluttered in his stomach at the sight of the fox man, but he purposely chose to ignore it. In one swift movement, he pulled out his Kusanagi and positioned himself into a fighting stance. "We have no interest in fighting with you," spoke the fox-masked man. Sasuke gave the group an emotionless smirk. "You have no choice." Dragon tilted his head to the fox, chuckling low underneath his mask. "He's a foolish one, isn't he?" Sasuke glared at Dragon, annoyed that he dared to underestimate him. He saw Weasel lean to Fox, whispering something under his breath to him. Fox shook his head at whatever the other said and whispered something back to the other. Weasel nodded, and then Fox walked forward. "I'll be your opponent," he said as he began to walk closer to Sasuke. His next comment directed to his team. "And none of you interfere." Fox stopped a yard away from Sasuke. "I hope that Snake's teachings were worth betraying your village, Uchiha Sasuke." Fox sneered at the Uchiha, who glared back with equal intensity, his mind wondering how a complete stranger knew his situation. I try to keep up with what's happening in Konoha, Fox said, answering Sasuke's unspoken speculation. And it's become common knowledge that the surviving Uchiha went to become the toy of Orochimaru. Contempt within every word the man spoke. Sasuke was pissed. He didn't even know this guy, and he was clearly passing judgment on him. He spoke with a superior tone, as if he knew everything there was about him and had the right to say it. Bullshit. He knows nothing. Absolutely nothing about him. Sasuke lunged forward and swiped his sword at the fox. Fox didn't give any attempt to dodge. Instead, he lifted his arm and blocked the Kusanagi with a dagger that suddenly appeared. Kusanagi, glass cutter. Fox began when Sasuke's confusion apparently crossed his face. Supposed to be able to cut through anything, unless the object is made impossible to break. Another dagger appeared in his other hand, swiping it at Sasuke. Sasuke jumped back to avoid being struck and formed hand seals within a blink of an eye. Sunbon formed from lightning came into existence around him, then shot like bullets at his fox-wearing opponent. Fox jumped and flipped through the air, agilely dodging the threats of Senbon's. He landed on a nearby tree branch. "Cute," he said loud enough for him to hear, as his left hand lifted and grabbed a crystal bead from a bracelet around his wrist. The one that wore the weasel mask moved, catching Sasuke's attention momentarily from the fight at hand. Weasel turned to the others and told them, "I think it's best for us to put some distance between them and us. It's going to become quite destructive." This confused Sasuke further with what the hell the bead did. And he only wondered further when the others nodded their heads and followed Weasel to the farthest edge of the trees, where they could still see and apparently be safe from whatever the bead did. He turned his full attention back at Fox, who was throwing the crystal bead up in the air and catching it, repeating this action over and over as he stared at him intently. He knew this because of the hairs on the back of his neck were standing on end. Why was he hesitating and attacking? He could have already thrown that stupid bead with how much time he was just squatting there and staring. Then, like Fox made a sudden decision, he threw the bead as close as he could to Sasuke, who eyed the bead closely, speculating further why all of them were so confident in a fucking bead. He took a couple of cautious steps back, though, not lowering his guard just because of the simplicity of an attack. Once the bead made contact with the ground, an enormous futon chakra exploded throughout the area. The ground shook violently, cracks splitting the ground and creating a crater of a radius of 10 feet. The force of the explosion that released hurricane-forced winds pushed over all the surrounding trees and sent Sasuke soaring back a good 50 feet. Blackness invaded his vision, blinding him for a time he wasn't sure of. Before he could muster the strength to open his eyes, his ears caught the sound of rustling next to him. He fought to keep consciousness for the mere sake of not letting them get the best of him, but he knew it was a losing battle. He was as sure as dead, and that knowledge didn't bother him in the slightest. It was actually welcomed. "You don't think I hurt him too badly?" came the voice of the one he labeled Fox, sounding almost frantic to his hearing. He could even recognize worry there, too. Now, why would he sound like that? "He's alive," the flat tone of Weasel said. "If these injuries kill him, then he damn well isn't an Uchiha," yelled a new voice he hadn't heard before now. Then the distinct sound of a hit connecting with flesh followed after the rude comment. "But he could need medial attention," said Fox with that same concern mixed with the franticness. "What if he has internal injuries?" "Tada." Someone sighed, and the next thing he knew, a person got too close to him than he personally liked. Then a warm, tingling sensation filled his body. It only happened for what seemed like a minute before it disappeared, and a female voice said, "The only internal damage I found was to his ribs that were pressed too closely to his lungs. I healed them just enough so when he's able to stand, it won't press any further to pierce his lungs." Another sound was heard, almost sounding like it was because of relief. "Thanks, Tara," said Fox. The weariness, the damage to his body, pushed him further into unconsciousness. The voice of Weasel became very distant as he said, "Now let's go before he gets enough strength to move. You don't want to hurt him again. Now do you Naruto? Naruto? The name of his doe was the last thing that went through his mind before he drifted completely into unconsciousness. To this day, he still doesn't exactly know what happened, or if what he thought he heard was his mind playing with him in a time where he thought he was going to die. Actually, he thought he was dead until he regained consciousness in the exact same place where he lost it, only to find that he was alone and that whoever that team was were long gone. Once he managed to get back to the hideout of Orochimaru's, the snake told him that the team he fought was actually Akuma, the deadliest mercenary team, and that the man who wore the fox mask was none other than the leader, Tatsuo. This surprised him. Back then, he had already heard the rumors about Akuma and their ruthless acts. This only made him speculate further as to why they had even let him live. "When do you want us to leave?" Sakura asked, her voice snapping Sasuke out of his thoughts. "Since this might take weeks, even months to find them, I want you to leave within the next 20 minutes. She looked up at the two. "That means I want you two back here, all packed for a 6-month mission and out of the front gates within that time. Do I make myself clear?" They both nodded at once before they disappeared in similar clouds of smoke. Within 10 minutes, both Sakura and himself were back in front of the Hokage's desk with packed backpacks hanging on their backs. After a moment's passing, Tsunade lifted her arm with the scroll she was previously writing on in his direction. He stepped forward and received the scroll from her, stashing it away in his backpack without a word. This was of the norm with the both of them. Neither wished to speak more than they had to one another. The same was valid for Sakura and himself, and possibly most of the Konoha shinobi population. "Now, get out of my sight," she said with a wave of her hand. "I want them back here as soon as possible." Sakura nodded. "Yes, sure, show." Sasuke merely disappeared without the customary pleasantries that occurs with normal associates, then reappeared outside of the closed gates of Konoha, where he didn't feel as imprisoned as he did whenever he forced himself to return within the walls of the village. Out here, his chains were lighter and less constricting. He was able to move without his every movement being watched and judged. Being out here was just less aggravating. His momentary peace and quiet was interrupted with the appearance of his partner and her ability to speak. "If I have to be near you for possible months on end, then we're going to do this my way," she practically ordered, half sounding like she was expecting to get some sort of reaction out of him. But all she received from him was a blank stare. "Well, I think we should head to a Wadakure first." Supposedly, Akuma was last seen there doing some kind of mission. "After we check, and if they're not there, then we can move on from there." Sasuke didn't reply to anything she said. Instead, he sped in the direction of a Wadakure, not caring if his temporary partner was by his side or if she could keep up or not. It would be too much trouble to bother to. Plus, it would show that he cared when in all actuality, that he didn't. Sakura mentally growled at his back, running over 1,000 ways she could inflict pain on the Raven. She could barely keep up with his high speed, but she absolutely refused to ask him to slow down. That would be like willingly admitting defeat to the arrogant bastard, and she would rather have herself boiled alive before she did such a thing. A couple of hours later of nonstop running, and she was so tempted to throw a few kunai into that ass's legs. She could clearly visualize how it would go down, but there was a minor flaw in her thoroughly thought-out plan. She doubted she would come out as the victor like in her fantasy. That was the only part that seemed a little unrealistic. Plus, there were the repercussions of her actions, like being arrested by Konoha authorities for the illegal offense of attacking her Taicho. It definitely wouldn't be the smartest move, but it sure as hell was tempting. Sasuke suddenly halted in a well-hidden clearing. Sakura stopped half a minute later, since she was a good distance behind, and panted to catch her breath from the heavy exertion her body was forcibly been put through. "We'll rest here," Sasuke said. "I'll take first watch." He jumped high into a tree before she could have a chance to argue. She sent a glare full of venom to where she knew the Uchiha was stationed, grudgingly plopping herself on the ground and leaning against the tree she sat in front of. She pulled her legs up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, and rested her chin on her knees to poorly shield herself from the chilly night air. Vaguely, she stared in front of her, her thoughts wandering back to the time where Team 7 actually existed. When her feelings for her Raven ex-teammate weren't so negative. When she was a stupid, obsessive fangirl, when in reality, she liked Naruto and not Sasuke. She only thought of Sasuke as a friend, but she kept up her facade because she stupidly cared what others thought of her. And for some reason, the villagers hated the blonde, and she never could understand why. At some point, she asked her parents, who also seemed to hate the blonde, why they disliked him so much, but she didn't get an answer. All they did was just sputtered and kept quiet. So, she continued with her show of annoyance and dislike toward Naruto, not wishing for her parents to get upset with her or be considered weird by her peers. But when the blonde disappeared, she was heartbroken. She blamed herself for caring more about what everyone thought and not being brave enough to show her true feelings for the boy she liked. She also blamed Sasuke for being so contradicting, for being such a bastard toward Naruto and yet loving him at the same time. It ranked third to the most painful things she's ever heard. The second was when Kakashi told them about Naruto's disappearance. And the first was when she found out that Naruto was also in love with Sasuke and not herself. All those times the blonde asked her out weren't real. All those feelings he claimed he held for her were all lies. All these facts smacked her heart brutally each time and made her bitter. Even though she didn't like the Raven, she was still civil to him. He was still her teammate after all. They trained together and took the Chunin exams with their new teammate, Sai. But when Sasuke left for Oto, the reason why she disliked him changed drastically. Since then, it wasn't because of some crush, but because he betrayed Konoha, everyone in it, and everyone who once lived in the village. Her dislike brutally turned into hatred the day he willingly went to Orochimaru. During the 3 years that Sasuke was gone, she became the student to Tsunade, strengthening herself so she could become the best medic nin that she could be. She also found someone she let into her heart to fill in the dank hole that's been empty since Team 7, and truly fell in love with him. She even made sure she ignored the words of others who tried to deter her from her now husband. She promised herself once that she wouldn't let the opinion of others decide her decisions in life. And she stuck with it since that promise day. When Sasuke returned and she got word of it, she sought him out and deliberately approached him. She stared at him blankly for a long moment. He did the same back to her without moving like a prick. Then, she punched him without any sort of warning. She remembered that he flinched, which told her that he could have avoided the blow if he really wanted to, but strangely enough, he didn't. Instead, he was sent crashing through 2 walls, ending with a brutal hit with the third. His unmoving didn't surprise her because she honestly didn't care, but what did was that he stood up after the blow with ease, and smirked at her. She would never admit it to anyone, but it frightened her a little that he appeared so unaffected by the normally fatal attack. After that encounter, she didn't speak to him at all over the year of his house arrest. Then once he was reinstated as a shinobi, she still didn't speak to him sociably, only when it was a requirement. And as the years passed, her feelings toward him have never changed or even softened. Sasuke would always be considered a traitor to her and nothing more. Her eyes began to droop as her mind turned fuzzy from the oncoming sleep. Her eyes closed completely, and she drifted further into unconsciousness. Meanwhile, Sasuke sat up in a high branch with his back leaning against the tree trunk. His Sharingan was activated, and he glanced at anything that moved. His whole body was on high alert and ready to attack if any possible threat arose. This was a time of war. After all, attacks were common nowadays. If a team didn't get attacked during a mission, it was considered extremely odd or downright lucky, although it never happened more than twice to the same team. After an hour, his vision wandered to the sparkling stars littering the night sky. He couldn't pull his eyes away as his mind brought up the memory of the time when Team 7 had done the exact same thing. Side by side, Team 7 laid on a grassy clearing, staring up at the starry night sky. They were presently on a team outing, camping to be more precise. And after a full day of hiking, setting up the tent, gathering firewood, catching food, and fixing dinner, they got to relax. So Naruto had the idea to gaze at the stars while they relaxed. Sakura happily agreed, while he gave his usual remark of HMN, his way of agreeing. "Na Kakashi-sensei, do you think that stars are people who've died?" Naruto asked, not taking his eyes from the mystifying sky. Kakashi wasn't the one who answered, since Sasuke beat the man to it. "No, idiot." Naruto turned on his side to face him, since he laid to the blonde's right. "And how would you know that, team?" He glared at the blonde, ready to give him the scientific answer, but Sakura interrupted him while he was opening his mouth. "I think it sounds nice, even if it's not real," she said. "To think that your loved ones that passed away are staring down at you and watching over you. It's a whole different perspective at how you can view the stars." Sasuke found himself considering this perspective. He had to admit, he slightly liked the idea of his family watching over him. "I guess you could think of it that way," he admitted in a murmured. Naruto turned partly to Sasuke at his comment with a smile, then rolled on his other side to Sakura. "Thanks, Sakura-chan. My thoughts exactly." Chapter 2. Never lost, never found. Sasuke, once again, sat on a high branch keeping guard. Sakura and himself were presently in Kaminari no Kuni 1. It had been 4 months since they've started the search for Akuma. For long months, searching for an elusive team with a partner he would rather kill than work with. Although work with might be too strong of a word, since trust in this little duo was nowhere to be seen. It's come to the point where they don't even help each other out when in battles. Which over the past 4 months, if he's been counting correctly, they've been attacked about 36 times. And that didn't even count the ones made by mere bandits. He was slowly going insane. And that's saying something, since most individuals who knew him already consider him legally insane to begin with. He wasn't sure how much longer he could take of Sakura's presence, and her not-so-lovely comments that keep flooding from her mouth. It was mostly aggravating, so much so that he was seriously considering murder. The only reason he hasn't just yet was because he knew he could be executed out of mere suspicion alone. A deafening explosion from his right caught his immediate attention. He shifted forward as he saw the smoke and fire drifting up from the top of the trees. He threw himself off the branch and landed gracefully near the still, sleeping Sakura. Surprise ran through him at her ability to still be asleep after that noise. How did she become an Umbu? "Sakura, get up," he ordered coldly as he kicked her hard in her leg. Hard enough where it probably would form a bruise. "What?" she demanded with a glare once her eyes were open. Sasuke paid no mind to her tone. He was by now used to it. "West. Battle. Move," was the only information he gave her before he sped off in the direction he had said. Small patches of fire still blazed when he stepped into the area where the explosion took place. It appeared that the battle was already over. Several dead bodies were sprawled all over the place, and whoever had killed them were already gone. He walked around, examining for anything that might tell him who was responsible for it. If he was lucky, it might be the team he was searching for. He heard Sakura arrive on the scene, and had to stop himself from saying anything about how slow she could be. That would start a whole argument, and the less he had to hear her voice, the better. Another sound of whizzing was heard by him, and he suddenly leaped to the side, dodging a kunai soaring past him. In one swift movement, he pulled out Kusanagi, while Sakura, to his right, positioned herself in a fighting stance. "See!" a male voice yelled from a few yards in front of them. Foliage and darkness blocking the person from view. "I told you I sensed 2 others." Sorry, came a female voice as 3 figures in black cloaks and familiar animal masks emerged from the cover of the foliage. The moonlight above glinting eerily on their masks. "Next time I'll try and listen to you and your big mouth." The one who wore the dragon mask growled at the one who wore the dog mask. "Huh, you're the one that needs to shut up for once to hear others." "Now you too." "Don't start," said the one who wore the tiger mask. "We do have these 2 to take care of." This seemed to shut the 2 up. Sasuke noticed Sakura tighten her gloves around her hands, obviously preparing to fight. But he stepped forward before she could do anything stupid and said sternly, "No, Hawk. They're part of Tatsuo's team." "How the hell would you know that?" Sakura sneered. Sasuke, as usual, ignored her and spoke to the three in front of him. "We need to speak with Tatsuo." Dragon chuckled. "Oh, and we're going to take you to him just because you asked politely?" His voice dripping with sarcasm. Abruptly, Dog burst into laughter, drawing everyone's attention. "What the hell's so funny?" Dragon asked. The female under the mask gasped for breath as she tried to speak. "Don't you remember, Uchiha Sasuke, Orochimaru's pet?" Sasuke glared from under his wolf mask at the pet comment, his grip on his sword tightening. "I'm no one's pet." He was pissed that this person he didn't know dared to say he was. She knew nothing of what went on back then. "That idiot," Dragon burst, turning his head to him and slanting it just so. "Damn, you're right." Seemingly ignoring the two, Tiger stepped forward. "What do you want with our Taicho?" she asked firmly but softly. She acted like she was the only one out of the three who was level-headed. Sakura was the one who answered, and by her tone, she sounded like she took a liking to the three. "The Hokage of Konohagakure has a scroll for him. To his liking, this quieted down Dog and Dragon. Tsunade-sama, inquiret Tiger." His brows knitted together at how Akuma knew of Tsunade-sama. And apparently, Sakura was also confused, since she asked after she nodded in confirmation, "You know my sure show?" This time, Tiger was the one who nodded, then turned her head to Dragon and whispered something he couldn't hear. Dragon shrugged, then saying in a deadly tone, "You two try anything and you're dead." He turned, heading back into the woods with Dog, following right behind him. Tiger stood immobile for a moment, before she too followed and said over her shoulder, "Follow us." Sasuke was reluctant to follow three members of Akuma to an unknown destination, where a trap could have easily been set up. Trust was an emotion he threw away years ago, and it wasn't like Akuma was the wisest candidate for that particular emotion to begin with. They sent off vibes of intimidation, not trust. Though Sakura didn't seem to have a problem, because without wasting any time, she followed without comment. Maybe you should count it as a sign that she didn't talk, that they meant no harm. With that new line of thinking, he followed, his senses spread out to alert him for any signs of a surprise attack. The deeper they walked into the forest, the denser the trees were becoming, blocking out the natural light from the moon. "Someone needs to go ahead to tell them that we have quests coming," said Dragon, sending a new wave of paranoia through Sasuke. "Don't want any faces showing." "I'll go," said Dog, speeding off ahead of them. Tiger slowed down her steps. "We need to slow down. They might not even be back yet." Dragon nodded, slowing to the new pace she had set, making Sakura and himself behind him to slow down too. Sasuke didn't think he liked the idea of letting the rest of Akuma know of their arrival before they got there. 10 minutes later, they arrived at a clearing with bags, sleeping areas, and food in crates laying all over the ground, and a fire stationed right in the middle. Fox, Dog, and Weasel were standing side by side in front of the crackling fire. Fox, also known as Tatsuo, had his arms crossed. "What took you so long?" Sasuke could feel the gaze on him from Tatsuo. He felt it the second he stepped into the clearing. It made him uneasy. He stretched his senses and activated his Sharingan to look around the clearing for anything that could prove their deceitful intentions. Traps and advanced genjutsus were the only things surrounding the clearing. It was nothing that would endanger anyone. They were meant to keep people out, to protect the ones within. "We want to make sure you two were back and weren't giving anything away," Dragon said, going over and standing by Dog. Tiger stayed by them, her posture defensive, like she expected for them to attack. "Did you find anything?" Tatsuo asked, causing Sasuke to snap his head forward and stare at the fox masked man. He was watching him this whole time, watching as he examined the area. And by the way he asked it, Tatsuo was amused by the action. "You don't want to hurt him again. Now, do you, Naruto?" That phrase ran through his mind as he stared at the fox. It was him who Weasel spoke to. Was it really his imagination? He didn't speak, choosing to remain silent and stare curiously at Fox. His silence, though, didn't stop Tatsuo from speaking further. "I heard you killed the snake and went back to Konoha, Uchiha." Tatsuo walked forward as he spoke, now standing in front of his Uchiha glare. Wise choice. Now, he just wanted to punch the amusement out of the guy in front of him. The ludicrous thought of Tatsuo actually being Naruto dimmed like light in a darkening room. His arm even flinched to fulfill his violent impulse. He refrained himself, though, forcibly calming the impulse to smash the other's face in. He was on a mission to get Tatsuo and his team to come back with them to Konoha, and he didn't think punching him would help turn his decision toward going to Konoha. Tatsuo extended his hand. Scroll. It sounded so much like an order that it had Sasuke biting his tongue to keep the few choice words from spilling out. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the scroll, then shoved the tightly bound roll into the tan hand hovering in front of him. His eye twitched when he could have sworn he heard a low chuckle coming from under the fox mask. He watched as Fox moved closer to the fire, opened the scroll, and began reading the contents by the light of the fire. Silence befell the entire clearing like just before a big battle. No one moved, only the crinkling of the scroll and the anticipation rising in the air became tangible. Then Tatsuo moved, handing the scroll to Weasel, standing to his left. Weasel took it and read through it. He took shorter of a time than Tatsuo, and when he was done, he handed it to Dragon. Tiger moved over to the right side of Dragon, while Dog leaned closer on his left, both reading over the man's shoulder. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," bellowed Dragon. "You're not actually going, are you?" "Unfortunately, yes I am," Tatsuo said, his voice different, less confident and more wary. "I have a promise to keep." "But Tatsuo," began Dog with concern. "They'll execute you." "Execute?" Sasuke thought. Did he do something to Konoha that deserved that sentence? But if he did, then why would Tsunade-sama want him there? And why would he even think about going? That is, if they find out who I really am. Tatsuo walked over to a nearby tree lining the clearing. He leaned against the trunk and looked straight at Sasuke. The tingling on the back of his neck proved that. "But I don't plan on that happening." Was that regret he heard? The tingling in his neck stopped just as Tatsuo banged his head against the trunk of the tree. "But I'm the only one that has an obligation to go. You four don't. So, it's your decision if you want to be in this or not." Dragon huffed, like the mere comment was completely ridiculous. "You know I'm in," he said, throwing the scroll to the wind. "So am I," said Dog, jumping up and down like a child getting ice cream. Tiger sighed, lowering her head slightly. "I think it's a dangerous risk for you, Taicho." But, her tone softening, "I have a feeling you'll become reckless with a certain someone around, and I wouldn't trust anyone but myself to treat your wounds. So, I'll be coming." Took her that long just to say that, he heard Dragon mutter to Dog. "Neither would I," Tatsuo said to Terra, before turning his head to the last member. Weasel stated simply, "Where one goes, we all go, no matter the risk. And besides, I haven't left your side in 6 years. I'm not going to start now." 6 years. His heart clenched. The same amount of time that Naruto's been missing. He closed his eyes against the thought. It wouldn't help him to hope over something that seems so far-fetched. He's just looking in places where the blonde isn't. It's just not possible because Naruto's gone. Tatsuo began, but Sasuke looked away as he swung his arm over Weasel's shoulders. "I was hoping you guys would come," he heard vaguely. He breathed in evenly, fighting against the daily battle to keep himself together. Each day, it became harder to not lose against the darkness that threatened to take him to the brink of insanity. It was a losing battle, though, and the only reason he didn't give in was because he knew the darkness held all his pains, and that was worse than death. "You thought we weren't coming," Dragon yelled, sounding highly offended. Crunching leaves of someone walking were heard, then a soft groan. Sasuke pulled his attention back from his inner turmoil into what was happening. Dragon had Tatsuo in a headlock. "How could you think such a thing of us?" Tatsuo grabbed Dragon by the waist and tackled him to the ground. Then the two proceeded in a fierce wrestling match, neither accidentally knocking off or lifting their hoods or masks as they did. Weasel moved over to avoid a stray kick, while Tiger and Dog stood to the side and watched. Sasuke was a little astonished with the two's childish behavior. Weren't they supposed to be the most feared mercenary team around? And here were two members, one being Tatsuo, known for his ruthlessness, wrestling like 5-year-olds. This was definitely wasn't what he was expecting. Sakura coughed loudly, obviously having enough of the scene by the annoyance in it, and caught the attention of all the Akuma members. Sure wanted you all back at Konoha as soon as possible. Sasuke turned his head away from her, the sound of her voice already raising his aggravation. So, we can head back tomorrow. Tatsuo untangled himself from Dragon and stood, dusting the dirt off his cloak. No can do, he said, the childlike demeanor gone and replaced with a motionless tone. You kind of caught us at a bad time, really. We're presently in the middle of a mission. So, you guys can go and tell Tsunade-sama that we'll arrive there when we're done. Neither Sakura or himself agreed or disagreed with him, which prompted him in asking, let me guess, you won't go back unless I'm with you. Am I right? This time, Sasuke did speak. Yes, he agreed, even though it wasn't true. The fact was that he wanted to stay and learn more about this group. They were a mystery to most individuals who weren't a member, and he wanted to unravel the mystery, especially the one around Tatsuo. Really now, a pregnant pause followed before Tatsuo spoke again. Then, I guess that you're just going to have to tag along. He sounded hesitate to even suggest the idea. He turned to the other 4 Akuma members. Stick with mission names only and hoods and masks stay on at all times. Oh, and no Kekiai Genkai. Now, Tatsuo began while strolling back over to the tree he previously leaned against. Why don't we introduce ourselves? He sat down, leaning his back against the trunk. As you two know, I'm Tatsuo. Ryutaro chimed in Dragon, giving a 2-fingered salute. I'm Hiko, said Dog with a wave. Tiger bowed respectfully. My name is Terra. Nice to meet you. Kane, said Weasel monotonously. Once the introduction were done, Tatsuo spoke again. Okay, since we already know Uchiha's name, what's yours, Bubblegum? Sasuke's eyebrow quirked at the nickname, finding it quite amusing at how easily Sakura bristled at just one word. Normally, he only had that effect on her. It's not Bubblegum, Sakura sneered. So, don't call me it again. It's Haruno Sakura. Well, Haruno-sen, Tatsuo spoke, his killing intent rising dramatically. If you use that tone with me again, you won't make it back to Konoha alive. The killing intent rose to the point where it would have sent any decent shinobi in a fit of trembles. And to make the impression even deeper, Kane brought a kunai out and swirled it around his fingers. If he had been any less of an Uchiha, he would have burst out laughing at the speechlessness that occurred with Sakura. He found Akuma to be more interesting the more they spoke, but he wouldn't let this curiosity lower his guard around them. I'm glad we understand each other, Tatsuo said with a smile in his voice. Now everyone might want to get a good night's sleep. We have a long day tomorrow, and that means you two too. I think I can put you two to good use. We're not under your orders, he said flatly. Tatsuo lifted his knees and rested his arms on them. If you want me to go to Konoha, you are. Unless you want to go back to Tsunade-sama and tell her it was your fault that I didn't come in the first place. Sasuke grudgingly sat where he once stood, glaring intently at the fox-masked man. There was one word prominent in his mind at the moment, and that was funeral. It wasn't Tatsuo's either. It was his own if he went back to Konoha empty-handed. Sakura, on the other hand, sat herself against a tree, the farthest one from everyone else. Good, Tatsuo concluded, glancing around as the other members of Akuma settled in various spots. Sections of the clearing where it was most likely someone, if they were lucky enough to get through the Genjutsus, would attack from. Night, everyone. The next morning, everyone was up at the crack of dawn. Sasuke hadn't gotten any sleep with the individuals of Akuma all around. Their presences made him nervous and jumpy. Actually, anyone made him nervous. He trusted no one. The only time he ever got some decent sleep was when he slept in his own bed, in his securely booby-trapped house. Currently, everyone sat eating breakfast. The Akuma members chatted among themselves on one side of the clearing, while Sakura and himself sat silently on the other. He watched each member interact, trying to get a feel for each of their personalities. Ryutaro and Hiko seemed to be the loud mouths of the group, while Taro was the more reserved type. Kane was silent most of the time, mostly interacting with Tatsuo when he actually spoke. And then there was Tatsuo himself, who had him completely confused. One minute, he would be emotionless and emitting a killing intent that would make good shinobi wet their pants. Then the next minute, he would be loud and joking around like an idiot. He didn't know what to make of him. But one thing he was sure of, there was something about him that made him want to get to know him better, to find out what that nagging familiarity he's had since he met him years ago. "So, Uchiha," spoke Tatsuo suddenly after staring at him most of the time he's been there. "Would you like to be a father?" There was something strange in his voice. Sadness? With his wolf mask still on, he stared at the fox for a long moment. "Excuse me," he finally said with irritation present. "What kind of question is that?" He shrugged nonchalantly. "Just a question. So would you. I don't think that's any of your fucking business." Tatsuo stood and walked forward until he stood in front of his sitting form. Squatting down, his face only a few feet from him, he gently grabbed his chin underneath the edge of his mask. The simple contact that should have sent revulsion through him sent a spark that made his heart jump. "Smart-ass mouth you have there." He pushed the strange feelings down and swatted the hand away from him. Tatsuo grabbed his wrist instead and brought him forward, closing the small space between them. Close enough where he could whisper it in his ear, "There's so many things I could do with a mouth like yours," he heard from the fox. Sasuke glared sideways at Tatsuo for the effects he caused on his body. "Get away from me," he growled menacing. Tatsuo shrugged shortly. "It doesn't matter." He walked toward Kane, his attitude changing from obnoxious teasing back to his earlier light tone. "Because today you're going to become a proud father of a 6-year-old girl." "What?" Both Sakura and himself yelled at once. At that moment, Ryutaro burst into laughter, falling over and clutching his sides from the fierceness of his laughing. He even heard giggles coming from Hiko and Tara. Kane merely shook his head at the situation. "You're going to trust him with a child?" incredulously asked Sakura. Tatsuo's head turned slowly to face Sakura. "What?" He tilted his head a little in question as he picked up a bag from the forest floor. "Wouldn't he be a good father figure?" "Of course not," she blurted out. "He's a traitor." Silence fell over the clearing, but Sasuke paid no mind to it as he glared at Tatsuo. He was neither wanting nor willing to take care of any child. They never really liked him. He always suspected they could sense his dislike for their shitting selves. Tatsuo gave her an icy chuckle, sending a chill in the air. "Then Haruno-san, you're with the wrong kind of people. 'Cause every one of us is considered a traitor to our villages in one way or another." After a pause, his tone turned deadly. "But that doesn't mean we weren't labeled a traitor prejudicially." He let the bag in his hands drop to the ground, then began to pre-form hand seals. Sakura took a couple of steps back, most likely suspecting that Tatsuo planned to attack her. But he doubted it. Tatsuo appeared to have a lot of self-control. If he hasn't attacked her by now, he doubted he was going to. And he was right when a puff of smoke surrounded Tatsuo. When the smoke cleared, a 3 feet 4 inches high person stood where once stood a 5 feet 8 inches man. The clothes he wore beforehand were practically drowning this person. He lifted a cloth-covered hand and took the mask from his face. Pushing the hood away, it revealed a little girl with chestnut hair and dark brown eyes. He turned his head toward him, and as he locked his child eyes with his, he smirked wickedly. "You can call me Mizuki Tusan." Chapter 3. So close yet so far. Sasuke stared at the little girl who stood where, not long ago, there had been a grown man. And that little girl had called him Tusan. Well, no, he did not like whatever Tatsuo was planning. And why was he part of this to begin with? He was supposed to be the outsider, not someone they could trust on a whim, even though he would follow it. That's not the point, though. He didn't want to be part of the plan. Not now, not ever. Yet, why was he still staring at him like that? Tatsuo broke eye contact with him as he let the cloak fall away from him, leaving him in only an oversized black shirt with his chestnut hair falling to the middle of his back. He bent down and unzipped the bag, pulling out two different dresses. One blue with forget-me-not flowers embroidered on the lower part of the dress, and one pale yellow with a big duck on the front and little ducks on the sleeves. He held them both up at arm's length, displaying them as he asked sweetly in a girl's child voice, "Which one should I pick, the blue or the yellow?" "The blue," said Kane. Tatsuo nodded and put the yellow dress back in the bag. Sitting to their right, Ryutaro shook his head. "Sometimes I wonder if you like being a girl more than a guy." "Oh, no. I like my body parts," the little girl answered, pulling out a pair of little girl's flowered underwear and putting them on. "Especially," he continued with a devious smirk, "that when they're against the same type of body parts." "Ew," yelled Ryutaro, grabbing at his head. "I so didn't need to hear that." The child giggled at Ryutaro's reaction and bobbed her head back and forth. Sasuke watched, slightly surprised, even though he really shouldn't be, that Tatsuo was gay. It wasn't really the gay part that surprised him. He just couldn't imagine a guy like him being with another person, allowing someone to get that close. Though, that's probably what others think of himself too. Tatsuo pushed the overly large shirt off of his small shoulders and let it fall to the ground, leaving his childlike body naked apart from his flowered underwear. He stepped into the blue dress, pulled it up, and slipped her arms into the sleeves. "Can someone zip me up?" Hiko enthusiastically walked forward, zipping the back of the dress up. "Thanks, Hiko-chan," Tatsuo said cheerfully. "Ah, you're so cute, Tatsuo, or should I say Mizuki-chan?" Hiko gushed. God, he couldn't take much more of this. "What is all this about?" he asked irritably. "And what the hell do I have to do with it?" Tatsuo sat down and pulled up knee-length lacy socks. "Your Sharingan will be handy on this mission," he said, slipping his feet in his shiny, black dress shoes. He picked up the bracelet with the crystal beads and stood, walking over and sitting in front of Kane with her back to him. All the while, Sasuke watched that bracelet warily, knowing what kind of damage one bead from it could really do. Tatsuo handed Kane the bracelet for probable safekeeping. With his wrists being the size of a child, it was the most logical. Kane stole it away, then brought out a brush seemingly out of nowhere, taking a section of long chestnut hair and then running the brush through it gently. "You and I are going to go to the village just north of here." Tatsuo's childlike voice turned serious. "We're going to be there for a day and a half before we move, so that the others can get into their positions, and so we can get the layout, blah blah," waving his small hand back and forth dismissively. "It's all typical scouting and plain-ass boring if you ask me." Kane began brushing the sides of the child's hair up, eventually clipping it in a hair clip in the back. Sasuke couldn't quite understand Tatsuo's attitude about all this. The guy, or little girl, wasn't supposed to trust so easily. It was unheard of with individuals like them. He knew this because he used to be one of them, and technically he still was. Being back in Konoha didn't make him trust others easier. It only made him more closed off, more distrustful of anyone who most likely would have a motive to do anything for him. But why was Tatsuo trusting him so much as to let him know details of a mission he could easily sabotage? "You don't even know me," he said flatly to the child, staring at him oddly. "You're insane to trust me." Tatsuo's childlike features morphed then, from an expression he couldn't quite place to amusement. "Yeah, that people have called me insane once or twice." But then again, a sadistic smile gracing his innocent features. "Those people are dead. So, it really doesn't matter to me, now does it?" He stood on chubby legs and dusted the dirt off his dress. "You might want to hinge." But Sasuke wasn't moving. "What is this mission about?" he asked, glaring at the little girl version of Tatsuo. "You'll learn the smaller details later." His child expression turned colder. "Now hinge." There was that same commanding tone he hated. Grinding his teeth against the obvious order, he grudgingly stood. He hated to be ordered around. He only tolerates the Hokage because he still held a small, microscopic hope that Naruto was still alive and would return home. "Fine," he growled between clenched teeth. He pictured the disguise he wished to use and preformed the correct hand seal for the transformation. A puff of smoke burst to life and surrounded him. When it cleared, he stood at the same build and height as before, but his skin tone was tanner. He took his wolf mask off, and instead of black hair and onyx eyes, he had the same chestnut hair as Tatsuo's and a darker shade of brown for his eyes, which the latter was trained on Tatsuo, as per usual, glaring at him. The shape of his face, he made sure of, was more rounded than his normal sharp and angular bone structure, giving him more of a soft look. He noticed the child Tatsuo running his eyes up and down his body with a satisfied look on his face. Nice! This comment only made him glare harder at the midget. Ryutaro, can you get him some different clothes? I don't think his umbu uniform will work. Ryutaro walked over to some scrolls laying by a pile of duffel bags and began looking through them, apparently searching for a specific one. Why this kind of disguise? Sakura asked, speaking for the first time since her outburst about traitors. Why not? Tatsuo asked back, not expecting an actual answer since he went on. Who would suspect a child was about to commit a crime? I would, chimed in Ryutaro as he rejoined the group with a scroll in hand. Tatsuo rolled his eyes. That's because you've been around me too long. Damn right, Ryutaro agreed while he performed hand seals. Sasuke watched the smoke erupt and clear away to reveal a set of clothes laying on the ground. These should fit. Ryutaro continued as he bent down and picked the clothes up. You appear to be the same size as Kane, so they should be fine. He threw them at him, and he caught them with ease. For an unknown reason, Tatsuo smirked. Get dressed. We need to leave within the next 10 minutes. He walked over to a section of the clearing with the other Akuma members casually following. The distance became too far for him to eavesdrop on whatever they plan on saying to each other. Damn, he thought, undressing himself in plain sight, not particularly caring if the others saw anything. His pride had already taken a severe beating throughout the day. Why not just add to it? He just had to keep in mind why he was putting up with all this to begin with. It's his mission. He has to do whatever it takes to get Tatsuo in Konoha. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Over and over, Naruto forced his breathing to stay even. Although sometimes it became difficult, like now. He couldn't take his eyes off of Sasuke as he changed right in the middle of the clearing. How is that fair? That flawless skin, even when under a hinge and muscle body, it was making it hard to control more than one impulse at the moment. 1. He wanted to jump him. 2. He wanted to tear the others apart at seeing so much of him. And 3. He wanted to stay put and keep his cover intact. All three were battling, and so far, number 3 was winning. Tatsuo, he annoyingly heard his mission name being called by Kane, also known as Uchiha Itachi. Tatsuo. It was said more pointedly, which caught his attention away from his internal struggles. What? He said shortly, more irritated that he had to remove his concentration from his self-control. Are you sure this is a good idea? Itachi asked, his facial expression unavailable for him to read. But with the years they've worked together, he figured he was annoyed by his lack of attention. Purposely, he tilted his girly head in a manner of confusion. Why do you ask? Using his childish features to his advantage. He easily distracts you, Itachi monotonously answered, the previous moment apparently proving this statement. But he's right. Uchiha definitely distracts you. Shush. What? He spoke smugly. Do you not expect me to stare with him practically naked in front of him? I think you expect too much of me. I don't think that's what he meant, Taicho. Tara, the medical shinobi of Akuma, said. Her real name being Ishikawa Ruri, former wife of the late Kirigakura's daimyo. We just want to make sure his mere presence isn't going to draw your attention away from the mission. That's all. She always means well. The heart of Akuma, who makes sure every one of them are well taken care of. He dropped the smugness he showed to Itachi and stared up at Ruri. You guys don't have to worry. I'll make sure it doesn't happen. He turned and headed back to where Sasuke now stood dressed in a black button-down shirt, blue jeans, and tennis shoes. His umbu uniform, wolf mask, and hitae were neatly piled on the ground. It's time to go, he told him. HMN, He responded in his usual one-word answers that used to annoy him so. And it still does. You guys know what to do, he told his team behind him without looking. And bubblegum, that you can watch over the camp while we're gone. He saw her fully ready to argue at being left behind, but he let his face fall into what he hoped was the deadliest look ever. And it must have worked because she shut up real quick. He just thought, though, he was still a little girl. So, it must have looked extra scary because homicidal kids are nightmare-worthy. He was about to leave, but decided to add distrustfully to Sakura, "Oh, and look through our shit and trust me, that we'll know." He walked to the edge of the clearing, calling over his shoulder as he went into the lining trees and heading to the Jinjutsu surrounding nearby. "Come on, Uchiha, we have a village to scout." Sasuke and Naruto walked in awkward silence down the path. Well, Naruto considered it awkward because he didn't know what to talk about without saying too much. But with Sasuke, it probably was more like he didn't want to talk, especially to him. And taking the years of experience in dealing with these kinds of moods when they were younger, he was being ignored and Sasuke was perfectly comfortable in doing so. But even now, the silence was too much. "You know, Uchiha, you need to lighten up sometimes." This only issued, "Fuck you," from the Raven. Not much, but at least it was something. Not in a talkative mood. "I see," he prompted. But this time, Sasuke didn't rise to the bait and remain silent. He jerked his head to the side, refusing to admit he was pouting at being ignored, and murmured accidentally, "Team." Before he knew what he let slip, he was being jerked up by the front of his dress and dangled in the air, right at eye level with furious Sharingan-adorned eyes. "Don't you ever call me that again," Sasuke sneered at him. The pure fury in his voice struck him harder than a blow ever could. Why was there, he knew. Team, his nickname for the bastard. Why would he care if someone else used that name to describe him? It couldn't be because of him. That was ridiculous. A ridiculous denial. "You be quiet." He couldn't let his true emotions show. Sasuke was too smart for his own good. One slip-up like this could be enough to let him figure everything out. So instead, he quirked an eyebrow mockingly. Now, Toussaint, you wouldn't hurt your own daughter, now, would you?" he said in a patronizing sort of way. Naruto couldn't help but notice Sasuke's left eye twitch, an unconscious action that occurs when he's really aggravated. He's always had that way with him to get on his last nerve. He felt the Raven's grip tighten for a moment before letting go completely. "Ouch," he shouted after landing roughly on his butt. "Now you didn't have to be so rough," he yelled at the Raven, who continued forward without looking back. "Yup, still a bastard," he thought as he pulled himself up, rubbing his butt while catching up to Sasuke. "Damn, you become pissy just for being called a bastard. The way you act, you would think you get a lot of it." Once again, Sasuke ignored him. He began to find this whole situation taxing. He took a deep breath in, preparing himself for what he planned on saying next. He has to get his point across, even if most of it was a big fat lie. He quickly moved in front of Sasuke, placing his small index finger on the Raven's stomach, successfully stopping him. "Look, Uchiha," he spoke sternly. Although a voice of a child isn't the best choice if you want to threaten someone. "I don't know what's up your ass, but you might want to remove it before we reach the entrance, which happens to be not far from here. You are a father now, Uchiha." He poked Sasuke's firm stomach, ignoring the shiver down his spine. "To me. So, you better start acting like one." Another poke. "Because I'm warning you right here and now, what I did to you years ago will seem like child's play if any of my team gets hurt because of you." He let his hand fall limp to his side, the guilt at threatening Sasuke making him feel like shit. "So, I'm asking you to follow what I say because..." His eyes dropped to the dirty path. "But I don't want to hurt you." A long stretch of silence followed, one that was filled with such animosity that it was stifling. Then Sasuke grunted his response and walked past him without another word or sound. Naruto grabbed his wrist, stopping the Raven before he completely moved out of his range. "Let go of me," Sasuke said as he glared coldly at him. "No, I can't." When near the entrance, so... He forced his face into something he hoped resembled amusement and lifted both his arms up like he was about to give Sasuke a hug. Upsy daisy. A look of utter horror crossed Sasuke's face. You're kidding me. He twisted his smile into a smirk. No, I'm not. A father wouldn't let his daughter walk for so long. The tick in Sasuke's left eye twitched, but in jerky movements of obvious reluctance, he placed his hands under his armpits and hoisted him up. He wrapped his chubby legs around the raven's waist with his arms, doing the same around Sasuke's neck. Naruto kept his muscles relaxed to not show how much the closeness affected him. Yet, he couldn't stop the shiver that coursed through his body from Sasuke, exhaling roughly against his small shoulder. Even with the cloth covering it, he could still feel the hot breath against his skin. As Sasuke began to walk once again, he rested his head on his broad shoulder. Without sound, he inhaled the sweet but spicy scent of Sasuke. God, how I missed it. He turned his head, so he was now staring at the passing forest and not Sasuke's neck. This was safer. He couldn't allow himself to get attached to Sasuke so fast. It just couldn't happen. He was dead to the raven, and it needed to stay like that. But how was he supposed to detach himself when his heart and body wanted the other so desperately? Sasuke stared in front of him as the arch of the village came into view. He didn't understand what was happening here. Here he was, holding Tatsuo disguised as a little girl, and a part of him didn't mind. There was something about Tatsuo that felt so familiar. He couldn't quite place from where or how he was familiar, but he was. Something that's been missing in his life, and deep down, he longed for it. This familiarity. He stepped through the arch and into the village, glancing at the various villagers. Tatsuo lifted his head from his shoulder and leaned back, using his hands on his shoulders to avoid falling. Are we there yet, Two-san? He asked with such innocence. Innocent, yeah, right. Underneath that mask, there was a deadly and ruthless killer. One who probably wouldn't have much problems in killing any of the passing villagers, who were looking at them curiously. There was no innocence in the child in his arms. That could be the villager's downfall, assuming innocence was in all children. Yes, he said as softly as he could muster. Would you like to walk now? He really wanted to say, yes, now you can get off me, but that would be rude to speak to your child that way. Yeah, he yelled enthusiastically, wiggling to break free of his hold. And Sasuke was too glad to comply, placing him down on his feet on the ground. His small childlike hand immediately latched onto his own, attempting to drag him in a direction. Let's explore, Two-san. But he didn't move. Please, she whined, tugging on his arm. He nodded just to shut him up and let himself be dragged all over creation. With every road they came across and every building they passed, he committed the locations of them to memory. It was a tedious task, pretending to be tourists checking out the sights, but in reality were memorizing where everything was. As Tatsuo explained in a moment where they were alone on a street, it was just in case something went wrong in the original escape plan and they needed another route. Night was just falling as they entered the hostel. They paid for one room with 2 twin-size beds, since Sasuke refused to sleep in the same bed as Tatsuo. Downright refused. Tatsuo skipped down the slim hallway that led to their room, like a little fucking girl, like he's been doing all day long. It had gotten on his nerves the first 3 minutes of it happening, and since then, that same nerve was frying relentlessly in annoyance. When they got to the door of their room, he unlocked it, letting the both of them in. The room was quaint. The twin beds were positioned side by side with only a small night table separating them. Once the door was closed, Tatsuo immediately collapsed like a bag of potatoes on the left bed. Arg, my feet are killing me, he whined. Maybe if you weren't bouncing around like an idiot rabbit, he murmured to himself, walking over to the other bed. I'm a 6-year-old, Tatsuo said, surprising him a little that he heard what he said. I'm supposed to be full of energy. He scoffed. But does that energy ever run out? Yes, he groaned, flopping back on the bed. I'm exhausted. There's only so much bouncing around I can do before I myself get aggravated. He sat on the other bed, taking off his shoes before laying on the bed fully, letting his body relax a little. His body and senses were always on auto alert, so he never actually relaxed completely. It was against his training. There was only one exception, though. But he didn't need to think about that time right now. Fuck, he never wanted to think about it. It only made the moment harder to get through. So instead, he let his mind go blank as he stared up at the stained ceiling. Rustling was heard coming from the other bed. Tatsuo was moving and doing something he didn't care about. "What are you thinking about?" Tatsuo asked with the feeling of his eyes on him. "Nothing," he said flatly. Nothing else was said as long, uncomfortable minutes passed, until Tatsuo asked out of the blue, "Why did you leave Konoha? Was it really to get stronger to kill your brother?" No reaction came from him. Surprisingly, he wasn't angry at the questions as he thought he would. He turned, seeing Tatsuo sitting on the bed Indian style, and asked his own question instead of answering. "Why did you leave your village?" The child's face fell from the question, a deep sadness shadowing his eyes. "I didn't," he said softly, his haunted eyes never leaving his. "I was banned from my village, but I'm still a traitor to the people I called friends and to the person I fell in love with." He wasn't expecting this sort of answer, nor the emotion that came with it. It looked like it was almost painful for Tatsuo to be reminded of that time. Such strong emotions from a ruthless mercenary. It was an odd mix with the idea of the man before him. "Why were you banned?" There was a small hesitation from him. "For something I had no control over," he answered vaguely, before changing it around on him. "What about you? Why did you leave?" Turning away from Tatsuo, he focused on the ceiling above. Because there was nothing left. His voice held no emotion, showing nothing of what he felt that pushed him to take that path. "And no, I didn't leave because of my brother. I left because there was nothing left to hold me in Konoha, and I had something to search for." He trailed off as unwanted memories of that night flashed before his mind's eye. He closed his eyes firmly, forcing himself to think of something else. Anything else to get away from the road that would lead to nothing but pain. Naruto bit his lower lip hard, the urge to go and comfort the raven beginning to make his body shake from restraining himself. "Damn it," he screamed in his mind. "Get some sleep," he said in a clipped tone, more harshly than he should have if he wasn't pissed at himself and lack of good judgment. He almost threw himself on the bed and made sure his back was to the raven. He hoped it would help ignore the ache in his heart, ignoring the pain like he's done for so many years. It used to be so easy, but now, with the others so close, it was almost an impossible feat. He was beginning to wonder how bringing Sasuke along was a good idea. Hell, having him within a mile wasn't a good idea. But now he was going to have to spend almost every day with him like when they were younger. He wasn't sure if he could do that, and he was foolish to think he could to begin with. How could he think he could really do what his mind strictly tells him to, and not let his feelings get in the way? There was no way he could. Fuck, was he screwed to Haptor for? Missions untold. Sasuke and Tatsuo were squatted on a branch of a tree, the shadows of the night hiding their presence from the two guards on the pavement below. The guards were stationed in front of large metal gates built into the stone wall surrounding an enormous mansion and its property. "You never told me what this mission was about," Sasuke whispered in the little girl's ear. Tatsuo cocked his head up to him. "I didn't, did I?" The mocking in his voice received a glare from him. The corner of Tatsuo's lips twitched like he wanted to smile, but instead, he turned his attention away from him and back to the guards. "It's an assassination mission," he said without any of his previous lightness. "We were hired by a respectable family from Aina, a village on the eastern border of Kaminari no Kuni. The general were paid to kill, molested their 4-year-old daughter on his visit there." "How do you know he did it?" His question lacked any sort of emotion. It really didn't matter one way or another. It wasn't like all the missions he receives in Konoha were honorable. There's been times where he's been sent out to kill an individual who was only targeted out of feeble revenge, but the employer paid big bucks to get it done. And the money is all that matter. "I have a sensitive nose," Tatsuo began explaining. "I could smell the man's scent and semen still on her, and I memorized it. When we got here, I managed to get close enough to the man and his scent the same." There was a short pause before he began speaking again. "Don't worry, though. You won't take any part in the actual killing." He looked back at him with a crooked smile. Don't want you to get in trouble with Konoha's authorities. He was about to ask how he knew so much about Konoha, but Tatsuo stood, drawing his attention to the reason why. The guards were changing shifts. I have to say that last shift is lucky tonight. He heard Tatsuo mutter lowly. Stay here. He ordered louder before disappearing in a whirlwind. 10 minutes passed before he saw the little girl of Tatsuo walk up the street apprehensively. His chubby cheeks were red with tears falling from his eyes. Excuse me, he heard her whine to the guards. I lost in my two-san. Sniff, can you help me? Sniff, .iw on my two-san. Then he broke down in a fit full of sobs. Sasuke quirked an eyebrow at his performance. He had to commend him for his acting skills. There weren't many people who could pull something like that off and make it look completely legit. The guards approached the bawling girl and bent down to console her. Idiots. Tatsuo continued to cry for a few more moments, then looked up from his hands and gave the guards the sweetest smile. No tears to be seen. From his view, he clearly saw an elegant dagger with a silver dragon's head as the handle appeared in his hands concealed behind his back. Then in one swift movement, both the guards' necks were slashed. Tatsuo's face remained impassive, even when blood splattered on his face and clothes. The guards collapsed to the ground, clutching their necks as they bled to death. A chill ran down his spine at the scene. The killing or the blood wasn't what bothered him. It was the image of a little girl doing the deed that freaked him a little. It was just creepy. Tatsuo's daggers disappeared as he gave a curt nod in a certain direction. And within a second, Ryutaro and Terra appeared, cleaning the area up like nothing ever happened. Once done, they too disappeared with the bodies to most likely dispose of them. When Tatsuo was the only one left, he performed two familiar hand seals. Kage Bunshin. A dent appeared in his steel walls around his heart. The force of it sent shock waves of pain through his chest, making it feel tight, causing his breathing to come in short and rapid breaths. Stop thinking about it, he told himself. It was the only way to function. He controlled his breathing, shoving the familiarity away, and found that two Kage Bunshins replaced the two guards who were previously killed. He obviously missed something. A tap on his shoulder startled him. More like the thought that he was so lost he let someone sneak up on him was what startled him most. In all of 1.3 seconds, he swirled on his toes with a kunai already in hand and the blade against the person's neck, only to find once his head calmed a little that it was Tatsuo still in his little girl form. He looked surprised, but the kunai to his throat wasn't what caused that expression. The depths of his eyes, there was confusion and concern mixed in with the surprise. Confusion and concern surrounding the reason behind the action, but not the action itself. You have a choice now, Uchiha. Tatsuo spoke in a strange tone. You can kill me or not, but I can already tell you, you'll regret it on some level. He didn't understand what he meant by that. Regret it on some level. Why would he regret it? There was nothing to regret. That's what he thought, but something deep inside told him differently. That same something that has him wanting to know more about him. It was infuriating. You don't want to hurt him again. Now, how do you Naruto? Gritting his teeth, he yanked the kunai away from the slim throat. Tatsuo let a long breath slowly out, rubbing his neck with the kunai once pressed dangerously close. Damn. What did you mean that I'll regret it later? He asked. Tatsuo's hand froze on his neck, his eyes the only part moving to look at him. His gaze guarded in a way that resembled nothing of the openness before. He diverted his eyes away. That's what I felt back then when I hurt you. I thought I killed you actually, until I checked on you. That wasn't a dream? His heart thudded loudly as the phrase Kane said ran through his mind again. Tatsuo looked back at him then, curiosity shining through the guardedness. Why did your heartbeat speed up suddenly? He asked. What? The question was strange in of itself, and after Tatsuo said it, it appeared like he regretted opening his mouth. How did you? Forget I said anything. His hand lifted like he was going to scratch his head, but changed his mind by the way he clutched his hand into a fist and forced it back down. We better get going. He turned as abruptly as he changed the subject. Follow me. and he sped off through the trees before Sasuke could say any more to him. He followed, unpleased that he didn't get any answers, only more questions and one suspicion that made the walls around his heart vulnerable to be torn down. Tatsuo stopped a few minutes later, causing him to stop as well in front of Ryutaro and Terra. Fill him in on certain things and give him all the necessary equipment, Tatsuo said, keeping his eyes directly on the two Akuma members. Then he disappeared in a whirlwind, leaving him crouching awkwardly in front of the other two. Well, Uchiha, welcome, Ryutaro announced. Hold on, you need a mission name. A mission name? Definitely. What? You think Ryutaro's my real name? Nah, shaking his head. You have to have a mission name. Don't want everyone to know your real one and be tied with us forever, now, do we? So what will it be? Sasuke blinked at the man's enthusiasm. This was supposed to be a mission, not a pleasure cruise. But then again, everything Akuma has done so far has been a little unorthodox. So, why should being on a mission be any different? Seriousness was apparently not on their top list of priorities. He focused back on mission names. It's not their real names. This made him wonder what they were. What was Tatsuo's? His secrets, that's what he wants to figure out about the fox. There was something. God, it was so close, just at the edge of his mind. And if it was what he suspected, what he hoped beyond what he let himself believe, he didn't know how he would handle it. Takai, he said, speaking the name that just popped into his mind. Yeah, that works, Ryutaro said as he shook his head in approval. What do you think? His question directed at Terra, who's been staring at him the whole time. Yes, she spoke for the first time since he's been in their presence. That fits quite well. Here, she handed over a pile of things to him that laid on her lap previously. What are those? It's everything you'll need for this mission. He eyed the pile suspiciously until Ryutaro exasperatedly yelled, You know the shit won't bite you. Sasuke rolled his eyes and grabbed the pile of items. Shifting through them, he found his wolf mask, Kusanagi, a black cloak, and an earpiece. You're not trying to secretly recruit me, are you? He muttered dryly as he put the earpiece on, a familiar voice being heard through it. Takai. Tatsuo's original voice came over the earpiece. That ain't bad. I like it. Now, why would we do something like that? Ryutaro replied with a mischievous air, apparently hearing his previous comment about being recruited. Hey Tatsuo, are you back to your manly self? He asked bluntly. Yes, thank God. But Kane here decided it would be funny to bring me the minimum of clothing. HMN, you never specified how much clothing you wanted, said Kane in a smug tone. He heard Tatsuo growl at Kane and a girl, who he assumed was Hiko, giggle in the background. Anyway, Tatsuo continued. Is everyone ready on that end? Almost. Just need to get Takai into his outfit, Ryutaro managed to say through his laughing. Well, hurry up. I don't want to go in there without everyone ready. And what do we do? He asked, already having his hinge undone and securing his cloak on. It wasn't like they haven't seen what he originally looked like before. You three are back up, explained Tatsuo on the other end. If anything goes wrong, I'm counting on you to back our asses up. Got it. Good. You ready yet? His impatience showing in every word. After securing Kusanagi under his cloak, putting his mask on, and lifting up his hood, he responded yes. All right then, we're moving, Naruto informed as he emerged from the cover of the brushes. Itachi and Hiko close behind him, moving at the same pace. They crossed the massive yard toward the several French doors located on the east side of the mansion. They entered with no problems. Getting in was a breeze. It's getting out that always seems to become more difficult than should be. Hiko, you know what to do, he told the dog-masked woman, whose real name was Oohiro Kyoko. She nodded and sped through a series of hand seals. Without speaking a word, a barrier erupted from the palm of her hands, encompassing the mansion and a few feet outside of the property perimeter. It made sure no outside influence could get in and no one could get out, which, if you thought about it, made it a slight disadvantage on their part. But that at least their target couldn't get away, though the person would have to get through them first, and that was unlikely to begin with. What just happened? he heard Sasuke ask someone on the other end. A barrier of Hikko's, answered Ruri. It's her specialty. Ichiman. He felt a smile tug at his lips. He knew that Sasuke was impressed with her ability, and that made him feel strangely proud. That Sasuke recognized the strength of his team enough to work beside them. Of course, he was ignoring the fact that he particularly had to threaten him to come along. But why would he think about that small little detail? They proceeded up a flight of stairs to the second floor. He held out his arm to stop his two teammates, then pointed up. Just in time, they made it to the high ceiling as a guard came around the corner they were previously standing. The guard paused for a second to glance down both hallways before descending down the stairs to continue his rounds. Gracefully, they landed back on the floor soundlessly, continuing up another flight of stairs to the third floor, where the members of the household sleep. He glanced around at the several hallways leading in separate directions. Stupid-ass mansion. Why do they always have to be so damn big? It wouldn't be called a mansion if it weren't. Bite me. He pointed down the hall to the right, giving a silent order to Itachi to go down. A curt nod was reply, and Itachi headed the hallway indicated. No, Kurama went on. I bet you would love the Uchiha, though. He ignored his inner fox demon, pointing down the hallway in front of him for Kyoko to follow. She did, and now he was alone with a choice of two different hallways that were left. The left one or the right. He contemplated a moment, actually doing the eeny, meeny, miny, mow method before choosing the left one. How things going out there? He asked through his earpiece as he dashed down the hall of his choosing, checking every room as he went. Quiet, for now, responded Mickey, also known by the mission name of Utaro. But when does that ever last? Chimed in Kyoko from wherever she was. He nodded his head in agreement, even though the others couldn't see him. He peeked his head into another room, finding himself surprised in what he saw. Instead of the usual fancy room like all the others he's seen, it was a staircase that led downward into shadows. Cautiously, he took each step slowly down the darkened staircase until he reached another door at the bottom. He could barely make it out, but it was a door by the way the small amount of light glinted only a little bit off the door handle. He tentatively grabbed the handle and pushed down, surprised when it wasn't locked. Upon opening, he was faced with darkness. His hot breath filled the small space between his face and his fox mask, causing him to sweat more. He put all his senses on high alert for anyone who might be within the room, but he found none. There was no one there. Breathing a sigh of relief, he fumbled over the wall for a light switch. When he finally found one, he flipped it on and the light illuminated the large room, momentarily blinding him. He blinked to adjust his eyes to the sudden brightness and turned, eyes widening when he took in the contents scattered all over the place. In the middle of the room was a long wooden table with 8 chairs. Piles of papers here and there littered the top of it. At the head of the table stood a bulletin board with 7 different pictures and various other pieces of paper tacked to it. His heart sped up and then froze as he took in each picture, each one showing one of the 9 Jinchurikis and 2 of the past. What the? He stepped in front of the bulletin board and let his eyes rapidly scan over the contents, his mind absorbing everything. He abruptly turned away from the board, breathing labored from the small amount of panic rising in his chest. There was too much information. Rapidly, he ran his vision over the entire room, finding about 50 or so boxes stacked here and there, each labeled according to the 9 bijou. A black granite countertop table stood to the side with science equipment placed on top. He approached the table, haphazardly grabbing one of the vials filled with a dark liquid. Blood. He turned it sideways, reading the label, Sabaka no Gara. Oh shit. What the hell are these freaks doing with all this shit, and with fucking blood too? Naruto was too shocked to fully comprehend what Kurama said. He turned each vial so he could read the label, and with each name, his blood ran colder, until he came to the one that held his own name, Uzumaki Naruto. Then he grabbed and held in his hand. Our fucking blood, screamed Kurama in his mind. Kane, get over here now, he ordered in a low and even voice. Hikko, you keep searching for the target. Numbly, he remained standing where he currently stood gazing down at the vial of his own blood. This ain't good. This ain't good. He continued to repeat over and over in his head like a mantra. Just standing and breathing evenly helped him get grounded again. He carefully placed the vial back into its stand, then turned on his heels, moving to the wooden table. Determination filled him as he unraveled the scroll on top of the table. He was bound and determined to take every piece of information in this room with him. "Taicho, what's wrong?" Ruri asked. "Yeah, what the fuck's going on?" came Mickey's voice. After moving a couple of boxes and placing them on the scroll, he answered, "Oh, just a drastic change in the mission." Just then, Itachi entered the room and stopped in his tracks when he saw the bulletin board. "What do you mean, change in the mission?" worriedly asked Ruri. At the moment, Naruto ignored the question, directing his order at Itachi as he pointed his finger vigorously around. "Grab everything. Don't leave anything behind, not even the smallest piece of paper." Turning away then and grabbing a couple more boxes, he noticed Itachi move in hurried steps to the bulletin board, snatching everything that was tacked on it and laying them on top of the boxes that were already piled on the scroll. Then he grabbed an empty box as he went over the counter table and filled it with the contents that were on top, his movements being more careful when he came to the glass vials of blood. Naruto focused on his task fully, grabbing more boxes and various folders and papers from the table. "Why, Tatsuo?" Mickey yelled impatiently. "Are you going to tell us what's going on?" Ruri was concerned by Naruto not responding. What if something happened to the three of them? What if one of them were hurt or all three were being held captive, and that was why he wasn't responding back to their inquiries? "Taicho." When I was searching through the rooms, came Naruto's voice, filling her with soothing relief. "I found one with tons of information on the 9 Bijou and their Jinchurikis." She felt her stomach drop in dread at this information. "Then we don't know who gathered all the information or knows about it," she said, already knowing what they had to do. "Exactly," Naruto confirmed, meaning this had just become a complete sweep. "You three have the ones on the grounds. And once Kane and I get done here, we'll begin with the ones indoors. Hiko, you find that fucking target. We want to make sure he's the one who's dead." Once Naruto was done speaking, Mickey and her gave their separate agreements. The youngest Uchiha, on the other hand, asked, "What's a complete sweep?" Mickey turned his dragon-concealed face to Sasuke, he being the one to explain to the Raven. "We originally came here to kill our target, but since things have changed, everyone gets killed." He rose from his crouched position, as so did Ruri, but she kept her eyes on Sasuke. She watched for any body language that would tell her if he held any resignation in going through with their current task. Either he had great control over his body, or he had no problems in being part of a massacre. "We're in charge of killing everyone outside the mansion's walls," Mickey said. "We might want to get started." Emerging from their cover. "Do you have a problem with this?" she asked Sasuke, the concern in her voice only there because of Naruto. Plus, she didn't want the Raven to become a hindrance in this situation. That would cause too many problems that could hurt her teammates, and she couldn't have that. She watched as Sasuke stood there perfectly still, speaking in a flat tone. "No." He followed the same path as Mickey out into the open yard, holding the posture of someone who held no doubt about his abilities. He held the air of an Akuma. She followed right behind him, moving so she was now walking side by side with him on his left while Mickey was on his right. Her doubts about the Raven diminished with his willingness to follow orders from a team he hardly even knew. It was kind of admirable, or foolish. They walked side by side across the yard, their cloaks billowing in the wind, their movements fluid and holding a tinge of grace. She could image what they looked like, holding an appearance that resembled three demons returning to take their revenge on humanity. A yell was heard. She and Mickey and Sasuke turned their heads in the direction. "Stop!" A guard came into view, holding his hand and jogging briskly toward them. Next to her, Sasuke disappeared, then reappeared behind the guard, Kusanagi in hand. And in one swift movement, he cut the guard's head clear off before he knew what was even happening. Mickey nodded his head, most likely because of the Raven's ruthlessness. Definitely would make a good addition to the team, he said loudly, clearly wanting Naruto to hear his declaration. She shook her head lightly, wondering if what Mickey said was true. Would it be best for the Uchiha to join the team? The noise of the previous guard brought out more guards to be slaughtered. And so the massacre began. Around another corner, Kyoko opened door after door. Damn it, where is he? She screamed at herself. She desperately didn't want to disappoint Naruto for her incapability in finding their target by herself. She was the kind of person who liked to prove herself to others who've done so much for her. And Naruto, he was the only person willing to save her from a fate worse than death. From those men. In her rush, she didn't notice the guard coming around the next corner. She crashed full force into him, both landing hard on the floor in a bundle of limbs. She squirmed against him and eventually untangled herself. She then grabbed a kunai from her weapon's pouch, and with a flick of her wrist, the kunai was impaled in the guard's neck, blood splattering in all directions, hitting the walls and running across the wooden floor like a river. She breathed hard when she got back to her feet, the small spout of fear easing. Without worrying about the mess she made, she continued on with her search to find her target. But each room she came upon were all empty, no general in sight. As she passed by a full-length mirror, she paused, feeling someone near. Turning her head around, she looked to see if someone was there, but there was no one around. Then where is it coming from? She thought. Then she concentrated on that presence and realized it was coming from behind the mirror. Slowly, she faced the mirror. A secret passage? For a long moment, she examined around the frame. Then she came to a conclusion as she lifted her hands and tugged on the frame back and forth. And to her joy, the frame easily flung open to reveal a door behind it. Grabbing the door handle, she opened it with not even a creak. For a place that's hidden, they sure don't know how to put locks on it. The inside of the room was dark, the only light coming from outside that gave the room a soft glow of navy blue. It was enough for her to see as she walked silently to the middle of the room. Standing at the foot of a king-size bed were a male and female laid on top sleeping. She looked more closely at the male and almost jumped up and down cheering when it was the general she's been searching all over the place for. Found him, she whispered softly in her earpiece. He was trying to hide in a secret room. Great work, Hiko, praised Naruto, conjuring a smile on her face. Now get rid of him. She nodded high. She pulled out 2 kunai and aimed them both at their hearts. She didn't want to take a chance that either of them living through a neck wound. She's seen it happen, and that mistake she wasn't going to tolerate. Throwing them with deadly accuracy, they both embedded deeply in both of the person's chests. Neither so much as stirred as blood soaked their chests. Kyoko moved to the side of the bed and pressed her index and middle fingers to the target's pulse at his throat, making sure he was actually dead. And when she received a pulse, she felt proud of herself. She eliminated a target all on her own with no help whatsoever. Target eliminated. Good, Naruto said, his chest swelling a little with pride. Come find us and kill whoever on your way. Hi. Itachi was just finishing up sealing the remaining items in the 3rd scroll when the emergency siren blared through the air. Naruto covered his ears at the sudden screeching noise, the loudness hurting his sensitive ears. Well, he said as he brought his head back up and took his hands away from his ears. He just had to deal with the ache. It sounds like they noticed our presence. Itachi deliberately turned his head slowly to him. The weasel mask, ominous, even without seeing the glare Itachi was probably giving him. He could just feel it burning a hole through his mask. He grinned under his, hoping Itachi would feel it. Clearly he didn't. He turned and grabbed the last scroll, stuffing it into his pouch. We need to go, stating the most obvious thing right now. And yet, he hesitated. Everyone in the building needed to be killed for the mere suspicion of researching and particularly stalking Jinchurikis. But that could jeopardize his team, and no matter the risk of leaving these people alive was to Jinchurikis, he would never risk his team. Everyone, it's time to leave. He spoke through the earpiece to his other team as Itachi and himself exited the room. climbed the stairs, and emerged into the hallway. "Hiko, where are you?" "Right here." The voice of Kyoko came from behind them. He glanced behind and watched as she caught up with them. "How are you guys holding up out there?" "Oh, just fine," Mickey said. "These guards aren't that difficult to fight, though they're like flies. When you take out one, two just replace it. You know how annoying that is." "Yup, I know exactly how you feel. Now, what side of the mansion are you at?" Um, the left side," Sasuke said blandly. "Hee, yeah, the left side. We'll be there in a sec." Turning the next corner in a blur and heading to the back of the mansion. He knew Itachi and Kyoko were right behind him, all three of them killing whoever came upon their path or was stupid enough to try and intercept them. "You might want to hurry, Taicho. Reinforcements are gathering outside the barrier," informed Ruri. They sped down another long hallway. A large stained window could be seen at the end. "Perfect." He grinned underneath his mask as the window came closer by the second. He was always one to be slightly dramatic. And dramatic it was as he went crashing through the glass window and landing gracefully on the trimmed lawn outside. Sasuke glimpsed in the direction where he heard glass shattering and saw Tatsuo, Kane, and Hiko running across the grounds toward them, the broken window being the apparent route they took. He shook his head at the dramatics of it all, then focused back on the fight currently at hand. He used his speed to take out several guards within seconds. Using Kusanagi, jutsus were not needed. Somewhere to his left, he knew Terra fought, probably still with a kunai, since that's the last weapon he's seen her with. Ryutaro fought a short distance in front of him, fighting against two guards at once, using a long dagger to block their attacks with one hand and using a kunai to strike the deadly blows with the other. He ducked from a katana swipe to his head, avoiding a clean beheading by 3 seconds. Sasuke rushed the man for the attempt, slicing his stomach wide open, almost slicing him completely in half. Turning quickly, he threw a kunai in a guard's throat that tried to attack him from behind. "Coward." Then he cursed under his breath when he realized he missed a slight mishap in his calculations. A guard to his right who decided to take his minor distraction to his advantage. The guard lifted his katana high to strike him, and in slow motion brought it down. It would have made contact too, if Tatsuo didn't appear out of nowhere and block the blow with a dagger. TSK, Takai. You're supposed to watch your back. Shoving the guard away and slicing his throat open. Sasuke felt no relief. There was no fear when the possibility of death arose. There was nothing. His life meant nothing to him. Why? He spoke hollowly. When I have you to do it for me. Spoken like a true member. I'm tempted to keep you. Tatsuo said too lowly for him to hear over the noise of the fight, but through the earpiece, he heard perfectly. He stared at Tatsuo for a long moment, and even if he couldn't see the other's eyes, that familiarity resurfaced as he stared at the fox mask. Like deep down he really knew him. But where? Tatsuo was the one who broke the eye contact first. Let's head out. He turned and headed to the east side of the barrier, where the reinforcements weren't lined up to kill them on the spot. Is this the usual break and meet later exit plan? Ryutaro asked. Yup, but since we have an extra teammate, we'll split up into twos. He paused for a second as he took out another passing guard. Ryutaro with Hiko, Terra with Takai, and Kane's with me. Avoid all trouble and meet up at the campsite. He finished just as they came upon the barrier's perimeter. Now Hiko. Hiko did a series of hand seals, and the barrier dissolved like jello. They all sped through, where a moment before stood the perimeter and ran as a pack for a couple of seconds. Then, just as they were coming to the residential area of the village, Tatsuo shouted, "Split," and they all separated. Each group of two headed in a different direction to meet up at the same location. Chapter 5. Round and round. Haruno Sakura was beyond bored. She was close to falling into a comatose state. Her hand limply held a stick that occasionally stabbed at the inflamed wood of the fire. For the last couple of days, she's been doing nothing but sleeping, gathering food to cook and eat, and staring at God-forsaking trees with only her thoughts to keep her company. No, these last days have not been exciting at all. She even grudgingly admits to only herself that having Sasuke around was at least interesting, even though she hates him and that he was particularly a cold brick wall. But a brick wall that she could aggravate to her heart's content. There was a plus side, though, to this situation. At least Akuma wasn't around, which put her at some ease. That team made her extremely nervous. You never know when they're going to turn on you. And it didn't help that they didn't seem to like her. She was brought out of her bored-induced daze when she heard a noise to her right. She immediately stood and brought out a kunai, gripping the cold metal in her hand. The noise came again, accompanied with the bushes moving. She tensed further when shadows formed into human-sized figures. But when two members of Akuma emerged from the foliage, she relaxed. She may not feel comfortable in their presence, but that didn't mean she would stupidly attack any of them. "Are we the first ones back?" the woman with the tiger mask asked. She couldn't remember her name. It was something that was insignificant. She nodded her head. "Yes, I guess. You two are the only Akuma members who've been back." Putting the kunai back into her weapons pouch, the member with the wolf mask caught her eye. The mask was familiar, but not to Akuma. The tiger-masked woman took a couple of aimless steps. "I thought one of the other groups would be back before us. We took a longer route." Sakura's eyes narrowed at the wolf mask, ignoring the tiger woman altogether. "Sasuke? Is it you?" Sasuke smirked underneath his mask as he lifted his hand and took it off, saying coldly, "Took you long enough," pushing his hood back to let his raven-colored hair loose. "Have you joined them or something?" her voice becoming shrilly with anger. He ignored her as usual, not gracing her with any response as he sat down on the ground a good distance away from Sakura. He actually enjoyed the company of Akuma than her or any of the Konoha residents. The time he's been around them, he didn't feel isolated or judged for every action that he took. They accepted him for no reason that he knew of, even knowing his past. Not like in Konoha, where he was considered a traitor to most people. Even if it was his own doing, he's still proven time and time again that he could be trusted once more. But no matter what he did, it made no difference. He was always judged and always alone in a village he stopped calling home. "It's not like Taicho would mind it," Tara said to Sakura. "He has quite a liking for the Uchiha." Sasuke stared up at Tara when she said that. He didn't expect that Tatsuo would even think of letting him join, even though it hasn't really crossed his mind either. But now that it was brought up, the first question that popped into his mind was, would I join if I got the chance? And he really couldn't answer with a definite yes or no. It was ridiculous, really. He's only been with this team for a couple of days, and he was already beginning to change his loyalties. Ridiculous. Or was it? It was Tatsuo who made him question himself. That familiarity he just couldn't shake. It made him feel things he felt ashamed in feeling. He only felt those repressed emotions whenever he thought of a certain blonde or whenever he used to be near. It was infuriating. He didn't understand why these emotions kept surfacing again, especially every time Tatsuo was near. But what bothered him most wasn't the fact that it was Tatsuo, it was the fact that he didn't know one way or another if Tatsuo is who Kane said he was those years ago. Or was he just hearing what he wanted to hear while in the middle of being conscious and unconscious? He was brought out of his thoughts when Ryutaro and Hiko emerged from the foliage on the opposite side of where they entered. "Are you two the only ones back?" Ryutaro asked instantly. "Yes," Tara answered simply. "You mean Tatsuo and Kane haven't come back yet?" Hiko asked. "They're usually the ones back first." She walked over and sat a few feet away from him. "Are either of you hurt?" Tara asked absent-mindedly, most of her attention focused on the trees lining the clearing. But she turned away from the trees and to them when neither of them answered. "Well," Ryutaro got a small cut on his arm. Hiko answered lowly, sounding hesitant to even speak of it. Ryutaro's head turned like he was giving her a look and said, "It's fine." Tara walked over to Ryutaro and ordered firmly, "Assume the position." "I said I'm fine." "Now." He saw Ryutaro flinch at her loud voice. Sasuke's never heard her raise her voice louder than normal speech. And even then, it held a softness. Ryutaro pulled back his cloak to reveal a tight black shirt with fishnet underneath. His pants were navy blue and halfway up the legs. They were bandaged with white bandages. A loose white wrap was wrapped around his torso from his right shoulder to his left hip. Black ninja sandals were on his feet, and several weapons pouches were attached here and there. Tara moved closer and positioned her hand a few inches from Yutaro's chest. Soft green chakra enveloped around her hand as she moved her hand down slowly. After a couple of minutes, she pulled back. "All right." Ryutaro then closed his cloak, silently walking over to a tree and leaning against it. "Hiko, over here now," she ordered the dog-masked woman. Hiko obediently rose from her position on the ground and stood in front of Tara, assuming the position. Underneath her cloak, she wore a sleeveless purple-colored Chinese-style dress with gold trimmings and designs. A yellow sash was tied around her waist. Black arm warmers covered most of her arms, and tight ankle-length black pants she wore under her dress. Black ninja sandals were on her feet, and weapon pouches were tied in various places. Tara performed the same procedure as before on Hiko. Once done, Hiko went back to her spot on the ground, and Tara turned her head to him. "Uchiha, over here." His brows furrowed at the request, wondering why she would want to check him. He wasn't part of Akoma. She had no obligation to help him. He was kicked in his leg then by Ryutaro. "There's no point in saying no," Ryutaro told him. "That is, if you're going to say anything at all. So, you might want to get over there and let her check you, or she'll forcefully check you. And trust me, you don't want that." A sigh of small frustration left his lips. He untied his cloak and placed a piece of material on the ground beside him. There was reluctance in his movements as he stood. He didn't particularly like medic Neens getting so close to check him. His trust in them was like zero. Hell, his trust in anyone was zero, but it seemed he had no choice in this matter. He could argue the point, but as Ryutaro pointed out, it clearly was a waste of breath and energy. He might as well subject himself to her wishes and get it over with. He only took a couple of steps toward Tara before Sakura spoke up. "He's a Konoha shinobi. He's my responsibility to check for injuries." Sasuke had to resist from rolling his eyes at her comment. Like she really cares if I'm dying or not. She probably would ignore injuries on purpose if she had chance. Too bad for her, though. He wasn't going to give her the satisfaction in doing just that. He took the last remaining steps and stood in front of Tara. "Check away." He pretended he didn't hear the indignant sound that came from under Sakura's hawk mask. He stood perfectly still as Tara held her hand a couple of inches from his chest. She moved her hand in the same motion as the ones before. The warmth spreading through his body felt the same as the time years before. "You should be happy, Haruno-san," Tara began sweetly. "This way you will have less contact with a traitor." The smirk that appeared he just couldn't suppress, because the way Sakura abruptly turned and stomped to the other side of the clearing like a child was too much to hold back. He looked down at Tara when the warmth was gone and found that she was already done. He gave a curt nod as a sort of thanks and went back to sit on the ground. The air became tense as everyone waited for Tatsuo and Kane to return, and it only became thicker as minutes ticked by. "Do you think something happened to them?" Hiko asked for the second time in 10 minutes, interrupting the silence. No one answered her, probably because the others were asking themselves the same question. Tara paced back and forth, occasionally turning her head toward the trees. Ryutaro remained leaned against the tree in silence. Sakura didn't seem to care one bit, casually sitting to the side and sighing every now and then. And Sasuke, for reasons he'd rather not think about, peered at the trees surrounding the clearing's perimeter with his Sharingan. His thumb tapped against his crossed arms in impatience and annoyance. The impatience because they were taking so long, and annoyance because he felt something akin to worry for Tatsuo. He clenched his jaw in defiance against those emotions and looked in another direction. That's when he caught sight of movement. He stared more intently in that direction, waiting to see if it was his imagination or not. When another, more clear movement occurred, he stood up and said to the others, "There's movement." "Where?" Hiko inquired as Tara stopped, and both her and Ryutaro stared in the same direction as he said, "Oh, waiting." Naruto pushed the branches out of his way, his cloak being snagged on them and scraping the palm of his hands. Itachi followed, right behind him, silent as ever as he moved. As he stepped into the clearing, he came face to face with the rest of Akuma and Sasuke. "Wow, welcome home party. Taicho, Kane, are you both all right?" Ruri asked upon their entrance, moving toward them. "What took so long?" Immediately, Itachi wrenched his cloak back, prepared for Ruri's upcoming request. He stopped arguing about this procedure years ago. It did absolutely no good. Not with Ruri. The only thing it did was anger her. And he found that was a frightening side to see. Naruto grinned at how quickly Itachi assumed the position. The eldest Uchiha wore a black, long-sleeved turtleneck shirt and black long pants. Black fingerless gloves covered his hands. Black ninja sandals were on his feet, and several pouches were strapped on his legs to hold weapons and scrolls. Stepping aside, he let Ruri check Itachi first, since he was already prime and ready for her. "We had a little trouble on our way here, but nothing we couldn't handle," he informed them, then asked mostly to Ruri since she probably has already examined everyone involved in the mission. "Is everyone all right?" "Yes, Taicho, everyone is fine," she said, finishing up with Itachi. She then turned to him. "Your turn." He clutched his cloak tightly around his body. "Can't we do this later?" His cheeks heating up at what he wasn't wearing under his cloak. "Now, Tatsu," Itachi spoke smugly. He could just imagine a smirk under that mask. "There isn't something wrong where you don't want Terra to check you, is there?" Oh, I'm gonna kill him." He glared at Itachi. "I'll get you back for this, Kane. Just you wait, revenge is a bitch." Several heads turned toward Tachi and then back to him, like they were trying to guess what was going on between them. "Just wait," he thought as he fidgeted on the spot. He continued on like this until Ruri crossed her arms over her chest, a clear warning sign that she was losing her patience. With an exaggerated sigh, he dramatically flipped his cloak back. Mickey burst out laughing, clutching his stomach and falling to the ground from the force of it. Kyoko laughed hysterically also, leaning against a tree to keep herself standing. Ruri giggled loudly and Itachi sat there, his eyes on him from the tingling in the back of his neck. The Uchiha smirk most likely in place, because Sasuke was smirking at his predicament also. Now, he expected this reaction from his own team. It was expected, but Sasuke, damn. He guessed it wasn't every day you'd see the leader of the notorious team, Akuma, standing in front of you in nothing but a black t-shirt, boxers, and black ninja sandals. Plus, he doubted that it helped any that his boxers were decorated with ramen cups. Nope, it probably made the situation that more hilarious. Maybe that's why Sasuke was close to cracking a smile. "What the hell are you smirking at, Uchiha?" he yelled in a playful tone, finding the rare amusement in the Raven's eyes something to cherish. The only reaction he got from the usually stoic Uchiha was a lifted eyebrow. He huffed in mild annoyance. "Can we get this over with? I would like to put some clothes on." Hi, Taru," Ruri managed to say between fits of giggles. He rolled his eyes as she moved to stand in front of him and did the usual examination. Halfway, though, just below his ribcage, the shaking produced from her giggles stopped completely, and the location already told him what she was about to say next. There's a very slight build-up beginning, silencing the others. He nodded in acknowledgement, closing his cloak in the process. He wasn't going to let this bring him down. It wasn't like it was anything new. He glanced at Sasuke and knew right then that in some ways it was new. He now had to deal with the possibility that it could all unravel right in front of the youngest Uchiha. And how would he deal with that then? "Should we still go to Konoha?" Mickey asked, breaking the solemn atmosphere. Naruto snapped out of his thoughts, shrugging his shoulders nonchalantly and moving over to where he placed his clothes and things before he left. What not? He turned his head so he could glance between each member of his team. Their worry was plainly written in their stances, and he didn't want them to worry over him. Forcing his voice to hold a cheerfulness he just wasn't feeling, he tried to reassure, "Guys, I'll be fine. There's nothing to worry about." A snort came from Itachi, and he had to restrain from retorting to the silent jab at his attempt to soothe their concern for him. Instead, he haughtily grabbed his pile of stuff and brought it closer to the light of the fire. As he was still bent at the knees, Ruri came up to him and handed him pills he was all too familiar with. He stood straight and turned around, in a direction where Sasuke or Sakura couldn't see his face as he lifted his mask and threw the pills into his mouth. In one gulp, they were on a journey down his throat, and he was turning around with his mask perfectly in place. "What's wrong with him?" he heard Sakura ask bluntly. He shook his head softly as he bent down and grabbed his camouflage pants. Still doesn't know how to keep her mouth shut. He stepped into his pants and yanked them up under his cloak in one shift movement. "Like that's any of your fucking business," snapped Mickey as he pushed himself off the ground. Naruto watched closely as he moved over to stand near Sasuke, then swinging his arm over the Raven's shoulders. His eyes narrowed, and a low growl vibrated deep in his throat at the contact. "You know, Tatsuo," began Mickey. "I like this guy." Sasuke glared, shoved Mickey's arm off him, and stepped away from the contact. This didn't seem to be noticed by Mickey since Kyoko came up and whacked him over the head, which in turn caused them to get in a heated argument. Sasuke focused back on him. "So what are Bijuu and Jinchuriki?" Naruto paused in putting his sandals back on, and then proceeded like the question didn't bother him and explained, "Bijus are the nine-tailed demons, ranging from Ichibi to Kyuubi." He grabbed his weapons pouches and strapped them on his legs, hoping to get out of answering about Jinchurikis. "And Jinchurikis?" He cursed under his breath. He really shouldn't be all that surprised. Sasuke doesn't let anything go, especially when he wants to know something. By now, Mickey and Kyoko had stopped fighting and were paying attention to their discussion like Itachi and Ruri were. Jinchurikis are considered human sacrifices to the Bijuu. Each Jinchuriki has a Bijuu sealed within them. "All right, then who are the Jinchurikis?" He snorted, looking up once he was done with his weapons pouches, and stared at Sasuke. "And why should I tell you and Bubblegum over there? It's not like it's any of your business." He held out his hand toward Itachi, who dug in his pocket and brought out his bracelet. Tachi tossed it to him, and he caught it with ease. He began wrapping the strings of leather around his wrist, waiting for Sasuke to say whatever reason he had to tell him the identities of the Jinchurikis. "Because I was part of the mission and have right to know information obtained on that mission. For one," he said as he finished tying his bracelet, "you're going by the morals of a village, and he used his hand to point to his team, not a village. And two, that was just plain-ass weak of an excuse." He smiled beneath his mask when he received the usual glare from the Raven. An exaggerated sigh came from Mickey. "Oh, for God's sake, just tell him." He flung his arms up in the air. "It's not like half of them aren't dead anyway." That really wasn't the point, and Mickey knew it. He gave the man, even if he couldn't see it, a look like he was crazy, then turned to Itachi to get his opinion. The elder Uchiha shrugged and said, "Might as well." Naruto didn't have to look at the other two to know they were nodding their heads. "I guess I'm outvoted," he murmured and then pouted. Fine. "Let's see, why don't we start at the beginning?" He bent his knees and rested his arms on them. "Ichibi, the one-tailed tanuki, also known as Shikaku, is sealed within the 18-year-old male named Sabaka no Gara. Obviously, he's alive." "Kazekage-sama," exclaimed Sakura from her spot in the clearing. "Nibi," Naruto continued like he didn't hear anything from Sakura. "The two-tailed cat, also known as Matatabi, is sealed within a 4-year-old male named Kayasuke. He's still alive and currently under the protection of Akuma. Sanbai, the three-tailed turtle, also known as Isabu, was sealed within Yagura. He's dead. Yanbi, the four-tailed gorilla, also known as Son Goku, was sealed within Rushi. He's also dead. Gobi, the five-tailed dolphin horse, is sealed within a 13-year-old female named Nakarazumi Cho. She's still alive and also under the protection of Akuma. Rokubi, the six-tailed slug, also known as Saiken, was sealed within Utakata. He's dead. Nanabai, the seven-tailed beetle, also known as Chome, was sealed within Fo. Again dead. Hachibi, the eight-tailed octopus, is sealed within Killer Bee. He doesn't need our protection. Mickey laughed. It's more like we need protection from him. He's crazy. He's eccentric, Ruri corrected. He rhymes with everything he says, and he rhymes badly. He rolled his eyes at Mickey's regular complaints about Octopops. This was the reason why he's never offered Octopops a position on Akuma. Not like he'd take it anyway, because those two in the same place gave him a headache within 5 minutes. Octopops talked just to annoy Mickey, and Mickey complained every time Octopops talked. It was a never-ending vicious cycle. Who's the last Jinchuriki? Sasuke said, snapping him back to their previous conversation. The one for QB. He cringed and took a deep breath to stave off his rising panic. He kept his eyes on the ground, refusing to look at Sasuke as he spoke. QB, the nine-tailed fox, also known as Kurama, is sealed within a male named. He hesitated before saying, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto, Sakura yelled, her voice frantic. The sounds of her shifting body indicating she stood and crossed the distance between them. You did say Naruto, right? He turned his head toward the now hovering Kunoichi. Yes, I did. Well, she said in a demand. You know about all the other Jinchurikis. Is he alive or dead? Her voice quivered at the end. Opening his mouth to end whatever they expected, he stopped. His eyes unwillingly shifted to Sasuke, whose complexion had paled so badly that now he looked sickly. Damn it, he couldn't do it. His condition is unknown. Unknown, Sasuke said. What does that even mean? He was already regretting his decision. It means, where did the need to put doubt about his death in the Raven's head come from? He couldn't change his mind, though. The damage had already been done. But that there's no real evidence that he's alive or dead. Then he could still be alive? What the hell? There was no way Sasuke actually cared about him. He spent years learning to read him, and there was no way to deny the hope in those onyx eyes. Damn, my decision-making skills are going down the tubes these days. No shit, brat. You have officially put doubt in that boy's mind. And at the same time, dug yourself a hole. You should feel so proud. Oh, will you shut up with your sarcastic remarks? Why? It's only reminding you where you get it from. Kurama finished with a loud chuckle. Naruto chose not to respond to Kurama. It would only fuel him to talk more. Right now, he had to concentrate on the mess he had created with his momentary lack of judgment. It's possible. He swallowed deeply at the rising pile of new lies on top of old ones. Kurama wasn't kidding when he said he was digging himself a hole. A 6 feet deep hole. Don't you dare put hope where there is none. Sakura yelled with tears brimming her eyes while her finger was an inch from his face. Naruto died on a mission, and that's it. There's no possible way that Naruto would still be alive and not return to Konoha. A mission. So I died on a mission, and they believed it. Gullible friends you had there. I think even the Uchiha believed it. Yeah, but isn't that how it's supposed to be? I guess so. Then why do I feel like shit about it? Oh, is that conscience of yours finally catching up to you? And here I could have sworn you got rid of it. I wish I had. Haruno-san, I'm just saying that I have no evidence that proves that he's either alive or dead. He could easily be alive and hiding himself pretty damn well, which personally I think I am. Or he could be dead like everyone believes. It merely depends which one you think is more likely. He stood, wanting out of the conversation. I am starved. Anyone else hungry? All 4 members of his team nodded, probably sensing his need to escape. We'll catch the food, Itachi said as all of Akuma headed to the edge of the clearing. What do you think is more likely? Came Sasuke's soft question before he entered the forest. Naruto stopped and closed his eyes at the defeat in Sasuke's voice. His chest constricted at what he had to do. He couldn't let his stupidity continue. He had to do some damage control. I think, with such a sudden disappearance that he's dead. He didn't wait for any reaction. He hastily walked into the forest. He wouldn't be able to take it. Itachi and the others followed after Naruto as he stomped through the forest. What mess things turned out to be. But what did he expect when it came to Naruto? He was too thick to realize what was right in front of him. For someone who wants to remain dead, you sure are trying to resurrect yourself, Mickey shouted, thankfully when they were far enough away. What was that unknown part about? Kyoko said, I was so sure you were going to say dead right off the bat. Naruto fell against a tree. I don't know why I said that. It just came out. He stuck his hand underneath his cloak and rubbed his neck. But at least I covered my ass for my mistake. Barely. Itachi shook his head in disappointment. I believe you should tell him. No. Tatsuo, you're making both your lives miserable. He still loves you. Naruto gave a hollow laugh. He didn't love me then, and he doesn't love me now. The only reason he said it that time was because it just fit with the moment. Stubborn as ever. If only he knew. So naive. Look, it doesn't matter one way or another. He deserves someone that can give him more time. Naruto yelled before the anger drained out him, causing his shoulders to droop and his head to sag. And I can't give him that. He turned and headed off by himself. You know, this kind of reminds me of one of those forbidden love stories, Kyoko said. Itachi scoffed, holding his arms over his chest. Not forbidden. Stupid and ridiculous maybe, but not forbidden. You're planning something, aren't you, Kane? Ruri asked. She knew him all too well. He smirked. Now, Tara, why would you think that? She didn't answer. Instead, Mickey asked, so then what are you scheming? Anything we should watch out for? I was going to go with something more discreet. Hints here and there, and maybe some pushing in certain directions. I'm just hoping my dear Otudo figures it out. Of course, I could be overestimating him, and he'll never figure it all out. You wouldn't have happened to already start this little scheme of yours with the ramen cups boxers? Ruri asked, sounding suspicious. Smugness swelled, but he kept quiet and walked in the direction where Naruto went. Emma, Kyoko hummed behind him. Who wants a bet to see when Uchiha finds out? I say 3 months for 23,000 yen. No. 35,000 yen for 1 month. Miki bet. If Uchiha doesn't figure it out because of Kane, then Tatsuo will surely snap and tell him himself. He doubted it. Something extreme would have to happen for Naruto to tell Sasuke himself without being threatened with death, and even then Naruto might choose death. The blonde could be far too stubborn for his own good. It frustrated the living hell out of him. Ahem, sounded Ruri's soft voice. I would like to put 50,000 yen for 2 months. Even Ruri. He sighed he might as well. 100,000 yen for 1 week. Silence followed his bet before Mickey said, Great, the bet's on. Chapter 6. Falling all over. The sun rose over the horizon as Akuma and the 2 Konoha shinobi prepared themselves for their departure of the area. They had breakfast long before the sun rose and decided it would be best to get an early start. Hiko and Ryutaro were cleaning up the clearing like they were never there, while arguing among themselves like always. Tara checked her medical supplies, just like Sakura. Kane had taken off to take down the Jinjutsu and traps, and Tatsuo checked their gear to make sure they had everything. Sasuke leaned against a tree, staring unseeingly off to the side. He had changed back into his umbu outfit, making sure his face was covered with his wolf mask. He needed to be able to hide. He didn't think he'd be able to mask the conflict tie on with his usual indifference. A Jinchuriki? He had never known. Could that be the reason why the villagers seemed to hate the blonde? Is it the reason he's gone? He didn't know what to believe. Was Naruto alive or dead? Everything kept pointing that he's dead, but he couldn't let go of what he heard those years ago, and it left him drowning. His eyes fell on Tatsuo as he stood and stretched. Could it possibly be true? Could he be Naruto? There's so many things that didn't fit with the Naruto that he knew, but there were also similarities. He shook his head. All that he was doing was seeing what he wanted to see, only because of that one phrase he wasn't sure he hadn't imagined. His fists clenched, his anger bubbling up from all the speculation and the building ache in his heart since the night before. Kane came back into the clearing, prompting Sakura to ask, Are you all ready to go yet? It's about a 7-day trip from here. We need to get going. Her foot tapped on the ground in her impatience. Yeah. came the murmured response from Tatsuo. Everyone ready, sounding none too thrilled. The other members of Akuma gave various degrees of agreement before he said, "All right, let's go." "Wait," Ryutaro exclaimed as he pushed himself away from the tree. "Did you send a message to that family in Ina? Or did you forget again?" A moment of silence followed, and then Tatsuo tilted his head and said sheepishly, "Yeah, I did forget again." He chuckled again, and his arm gave up, but stopped halfway before he lowering back down. "Well, I'm going to do that before we go." He turned to Sakura. "So the—" sounding anything but. Sasuke watched as Tatsuo brought out a scroll and began scribbling on it. He wished he was closer, then maybe he could have caught a glimpse of his handwriting. The suspicion still lingering. Tatsuo rolled the scroll up when he was done and bound it together with string. He then did a series of hand seals and slammed his hand on the ground. A puff of smoke exploded out and a two-tailed red fox sat on the ground once it cleared. "Greetings again, Na." The fox's muzzle was grabbed by Tatsuo, causing what could only be described as a glare being directed at him. "Sorry," Tatsuo said, "but we have guests here, so let's keep with calling me Tatsuo." The fox jerked its head from his grip once he loosened his hold. "Whatever, Tatsuo," a feminine voice snipped. "Just don't do that again." Saw the. His hands up in surrender. She rubbed her muzzle with her paw. "So, what do you want?" "Yeah, well, I need you to deliver this scroll to the family in Ina. You should know which one I'm talking about." The fox nodded and asked, "Fine. Do you want me to return to you to tell you they received it?" She grabbed the scroll from Tatsuo's hand with her mouth. "Yes." She nodded once and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Tatsuo stood and Terra asked, "What about Gara-sama? Don't we need to inform him where we're going?" "Gara? As in Sabaka no Gara? How did you know the Kazekage-sama?" Sakura said. He could always count on her to open her mouth and ask the questions she shouldn't be asking. All 5 animal masks shifted to her in an ominous way. "My, aren't you full of questions?" Tatsuo turned back to Terra, ignoring Sakura. "And no, I wasn't planning on it. Not until we reach Konoha, that is." Kane snorted. "Afraid he'll beat us to the gates and break your legs before you have a chance to step 1 foot within the place." "Ha ha, but yeah, that's exactly why." He pointed a finger at the other members of Akuma. "And don't laugh at me. You know he'll do it. Now are we going, or are we going to stand around all day?" He didn't wait for any reply as he headed out of the clearing. His eyes narrowed at Tatsuo's back. "Who are you?" For half a day, they've been traveling by the tree branches, not taking a break. The Konoha shinobi were in the lead, while Akuma followed close behind. Most kept quiet except for the usual chatterboxes Kyoto and Miki. They talked about random things and made jokes, which the others would laugh at. Naruto would put his input on certain subjects, and then fall back to silence as he watched Sasuke's back. Well, he watched his ass partly too with each jump. Scrumptious. He lost focus for a moment before he shook his head and went back to worrying about the emotion he saw in those onyx eyes the night before. It was uncommon, extremely uncommon to see that type of emotion from the normally stoic Uchiha. One would normally see anger, annoyance, and maybe a smidgen of humor. Then why did he see such hope when there was a chance he was still alive? It was curious and a little disconcerting. Sasuke was supposed to hate him, wasn't he? Hell, he still couldn't find a reasonable explanation for that one night they had together. Why would he do something so intimate with him if he didn't feel anything for him? He growled, "I'm thinking too much into this," tempted to pull his hair out from the questions that were resurfacing in his mind. "Yeah, might want to stop that. You might hurt something." "Haha, you're so funny." I thought it was funny. Before he could contemplate Sasuke's actions of that morning, his ears picked up the zinging sound of a kunai soaring in their direction. "Attack!" he yelled to everyone else. He jumped back out of the way as the same as his team, while the 2 Umbu stopped and turned around to them. "Damn, and here I thought we were going to go a whole day without being attacked," he murmured. He extended his senses to his surroundings and discovered 5 enemies spread out around them. "You're in the wrong territory," said a voice of a male as he appeared on a tree branch several yards ahead. His arms were crossed, and he wore a Kumo Hittite on his right forearm. He had everyone and smirked. Konoha must be really desperate to hire Akuma. Which one of you is the leader, Tatsuo? Naruto quirked an eyebrow in curiosity, and then he jumped to a closer tree branch. He slowly pulled out 2 kunai out of his weapons pouch while he said, "That would be me. What the hell do you want?" His voice ice cold. The Kumo shinobi gave a partial bow. Now, that's some respect, before saying, "I would like to make a proposition to you." A moment passed like he expected a response, and when he got none, he continued, "Whatever that Konoha is paying you, I'm willing to bet my life that our rakeage would pay you double the price." Double. He's not surprised. Killer Bee's brother did like to win no matter the cost. Hold on. I don't even know what Konoha is paying us. If anything, he sighed, so complicated. So how much is that? Just give me an estimate. That received at least one glare, several heated stares, and of course, Sakura yelling, "What the hell? You already?" "Shut up," he snapped. "I'm trying to construct business here." The smirk on the Kumo shinobi's face morphed into a grin. "Just name your price. I'm sure we can work something out." Naruto grinned also, but his was more feral. "Well," he tilted his head up in a gesture of contemplating before he threw the 2 kunai in the directions of 2 of the hidden Kumo shinobi, killing them. 2 down. What about your lives? 3 to go. This seemed to be the green light to start fighting. Sasuke and Sakura dealt with 2 of the hidden shinobi, while Ruri, Kyoto, and Miki dealt with the 3rd. "Now should we take our time or make this quick?" he heard Kyoko asked. Began Miki. "I personally just want to get this over with. I'm not in the mood to play around today." "All right, quick it is," Kyoto said. "You just got lucky today." Naruto rolled his eyes as Itachi landed on the same branch as him and asked, "Do you want me to deal with him?" They had the final Kumo shinobi, the one who acted like the leader. Naruto turned to Itachi. "What? Don't want to fight with me?" "I'll take that, as we'll both be dealing with him." "Yup," he accented the P. "I don't even know why you try and get out of it." He sped toward the leader. "It could be because you like to overkill them and destroy a fair amount of landscape," Itachi said low enough where a normal shinobi couldn't hear. "No one ever said he was normal." "I heard that," he yelled over his shoulder. "And I don't overkill." The snort of disbelief he heard with ease over the other battles. He pushed chakra into his palms, and his daggers materialized. He took a swipe at the leader, who jumped back enough where he only sustained a small cut. In retaliation, a kunai came soaring at him. He swirled, only putting an inch between his neck and the lethal edge, and used his leg to kick the shinobi in the gut, knocking the breath out of him. Itachi appeared behind leader with his sword in his hand, appearing to be prepared to cut his head off. He must have realized the threat, because his body free fell off the branch and landed on a branch a short distance below with a sickly crack. "That was stupid," Naruto said to no one in particular, but Itachi nodded his agreement all the same. They jumped down to the branch where the enemy struggled to get up. Did he break a hip? He couldn't help but chuckle at the thought. It's kind of hard not to, especially when Kyuubi laughed hysterically in his mind while making weird jokes between the fits of laughter. "I won't go down so easily," sneered the Kumo shinobi. He looked over at Itachi, who looked back to him. They share an expression of "this guy's crazy." They turned their attentions back forward when the shinobi stumbled toward them with a kunai still in hand. Naruto had to suppress the urge to laugh at the guy's condition. On some strange level, he thought the whole thing was hilarious. Itachi disappeared while Naruto crossed his arms and waited patiently. He didn't bother to defend himself as the non-existent threat of the Kumo shinobi came closer, because already knew how this was going to end. Why waste the energy? Just when the enemy came within a couple of feet of him, Itachi appeared behind him again and swiped his sword horizontally, cutting his head off. Blood splattered, and the head and body stumbled and crashed to the forest floor below. "Well, that was—" Naruto began cheerfully, but then deflated of that cheerfulness as he continued. "Boring." He breathed out a sigh and scanned for the others to see how they fared. His eyes landed on the rest of his team first, seeing they had dealt with their opponent. He then searched out for the two Konoha shinobi and found them a little ways to his left. His brows furrowed when he saw Sasuke beating the living crap out of his opponent. He whacked Itachi on the arm without taking his eyes off of Sasuke. You say I overkill. At least I don't beat them to a bloody pulp. Either it's his new fighting style or he's trying to solve some issues, Itachi said. Since I can't see the former, I'm going to go with the latter. No cheat. He also couldn't see this as a new fighting style. He thought of Sasuke as a more of kill them first, ask questions later type of fighter. But this went beyond his merciless viewpoint. Like Itachi suggested, emotion had to be behind it. But what sort of issues would Sasuke have to get that kind of reaction out of him? A small part of him suspected, but the denial overshadowed it. He jumped to the branch, where Sasuke still relentlessly pounded on the guy. With the lack of a second heartbeat, a very dead guy. He placed his hand on the Raven's shoulder, which resulted in Sasuke to swirl around and aim his next punch at him. He caught it and said calmly, the guy's dead. I think you can stop hitting him now. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end from what he could guess was from a glare as Sasuke yanked his hand out his grip. He watched Sasuke with worry as the Raven jumped down to the ground and walked off. A huff from Sakura caught his attention, and he growled lowly from the smugness radiating off from her. Whatever she thought she could prove with Sasuke's little display, he would make sure it never came to pass. He picked up the bloody body and carried the dead weight over to where the other two bodies were thrown in a pile on the forest floor. He dumped the body on top like a sack of potatoes as Mickey asked, "What's with Uchi, huh?" "I don't know." Itachi formed several hand seals and set the corpses on fire. Naruto stared at the blazing flames, thinking of Sasuke until the smell of burning flesh got too much for his sensitive nose. He walked to Ruri and Kyoko, who stood several yards away from the cleanup. They couldn't take the smell either. We'll wait until the corpses are completely burned, then travel for a couple more hours before finding a place to rest for the night. That good? They nodded, and then Ruri said, I'll check everyone for injuries then. He gave his own nod before jumping back up in the branches in search for the two Konoha shinobi to inform them. Niji stood in front of the wooden doors of the Hokage office, dressed in his umbu uniform with his bare mask hanging from his hip. He knocked softly on the door. A moment passed before the voice of the Hokage yelled, "Come in." He opened the door and walked in. Surprise passed through him for a second at the sight of Shikamaru standing in front of her desk. He wore his Jounin uniform, which still surprised him at how he managed to pass, and appeared half asleep. He stood next to Shikamaru and bowed respectfully. "You wanted to see me, Hokage-sama." The Hokage stared at them for a long moment with her hand folded on top of the desk. "Yes, Hyuga-san. I wanted to inform you too that I just gotten word from Sakura that she and Uchiha have made contact with Akuma and are making their way back here with him." She finished with an exaggerated smile. Shock filtered through his impassive mask, while Shikamaru's body stiffened and his head snapped to her. "Naruto's actually coming back?" She nodded, causing Niji's brows to furrow and ask, "Why? He should know how dangerous it is for him to be in this village." "Yes, I know." Her smile faltered. "That's why I asked for you two. Since you two are the only ones among his former peers that know he's alive, I need you to make sure that no suspicion arises when he's here." Easier said than done. What about Uchiha? He's bound to figure it out. He may not like him, but he could admit, even just to himself, that Uchiha was smart. And when it comes to anything that may relate to Naruto, an obsession lingered and flourished with a passion. A sigh came from beside him. This is going to be so troublesome. The Hokage closed her eyes briefly. That will be up to the brat. If he's smart, he'd tell him, but you know how that goes. Yes, smarts didn't run in that blonde's blood. He took a deep breath and thought of Gaara. Did he know about this? And if so, why would he let Naruto come here? Knowing the blonde, though, he hadn't even told the redhead about any of it. He hated thinking similarly to Shikamaru, but this was going to be a lot of stress. "When are they expected to arrive?" he asked, wanting to be at the gates when they do arrive. "In a few days," she said. You two will be the first to be informed, so you can greet them at the gates. She turned her attention fully to Shikamaru, who dazed out the window. Nara, the Hokage, tried once. Nara, she tried again, her annoyance rising along with her voice. Nara, she yelled, finally catching his attention. He turned his head toward the Hokage. What? He asked with grogginess, like he had just woken up. His eyes said something else, though. They were alert and filled with a worry he had never seen there before. The Hokage rolled her eyes. You're to be at the gates when a messenger tells you to be there. Got it. She only received a lazy nod in response. Closing her eyes, she rested her hand in her hand. You two are dismissed. Her tone filled with exasperation. Get out of my sight. A hand caressed Sasuke's arm, sending shivers of warmth throughout his body. He stayed relaxed, not feeling threatened. That was curious. He opened his eyes slowly, vaguely wondering who would dare to touch him so intimately. Yet, he was in no rush as he rolled on his back and rubbed his eyes in an attempt to get the sleep out of them. He leaned up on his elbows to glare at whoever he was about to kill, but stopped short when he saw who it was. Dope, he said softly as he drank in the blonde's 12-year-old self sitting on the side of his bed in a dark orange shirt and black sweatpants. Where the hell have you been? Naruto shrugged. Right in front of you. He leaned close to his lips and grinned brightly. I've missed you. Sasuke's stomach fluttered at the sincerity in those sapphire eyes. He lifted his hand, balancing his body on one elbow, and caressed the whiskered cheek lovingly. I've missed you too. Closing the gap between them, he pressed his lips to Naruto's. Don't leave me again. Never. The word was whispered before Naruto silenced him again by his lips. Arms wrapped around his shoulders as Naruto rose to his knees and pressed him down against the mattress. Sasuke used one hand and slid it down his chest to his waist, and then guiding the limb under the blonde's shirt. Muscles rippled under his hand as he moved up to a nipple. Naruto gasped when he ran the pad of his thumb over the erect nub, giving him a chance to slip his tongue into his mouth, deepening the kiss. His other hand went to his waist and gently maneuvered Naruto, so he now straddled his lap, causing their covered erections to graze each other. He hissed out his pleasure while Naruto gasped his out. Naruto leaned forward until their foreheads touched and stared down into his eyes. He stared back, his breath catching at the adoration directed at him. He shivered when hands slipped under his white shirt and ran up his chest, lifting his shirt also. He never broke the eye contact until insistent tugging had him lifting his arms and having the shirt being pulled off. Once off, the material got thrown out of sight. The same had been done with Naruto's shirt. He allowed his eyes to travel along the gorgeous, tan chest as it rose and fell in rapid succession with a light sheen of sweat glistening his skin. He ran his hand up and then down, scraping his blunt nails as he did so, absolutely loving the noises his actions caused. He pulled him back to his chest and passionately kissed him. He wrapped his right arm around Naruto's waist and urged him to rock. The first roll had them both moaning into the kiss. Sasuke moved from the blonde's lips to the expanse of his neck, sucking and nipping on the taut flesh. Sasuke, Naruto moaned, digging his nails into his shoulder and back. His hips jerked at his name, falling from his lips. He lifted Naruto up and placed him on his back on the mattress with him easily fitting between his legs. Their hips slowed only momentarily before grinding even harder and faster. Naru, he moaned into the blondes as he wrapped his legs around his waist. I love you. Sasuke, Naruto panted out, pulling on his hair to lift his head. He did, his heart soaring, and kissed him tenderly. Sasuke pulled back after a minute and gazed down into Sapphire. I love you too. The dream blurred and Sasuke snapped his eyes open to darkness and a faint outline of trees. His breath came to him in pants, and the erection in his pants throbbed painfully. That held nothing compared to the aches brutally stabbing his heart as reality came crashing down on him. Only a dream, and that thought sent his erection down fast. His eyes burned, and he roughly shoved his hand under his mask and over his face to help stave off the tears. He hasn't dreamed of Naruto in months. Why did he have to dream of him now? It's because I've been thinking about him too much lately. Far too much. He jumped to the ground from the tree branch he had been sleeping on and quickly made his way out of the camp they had made up. He had to get away from the others. His hands balled into his fists, and his jaw clenched to keep the scream in. It's bad enough that his facade slipped in front of the others earlier. He wouldn't let it slip again. When he thought he was far enough away, he swiftly pulled his arm back and punched the nearest tree. A sharp pain resonated up his arm from his already bruised knuckles. That didn't stop him, though, from continuing to take his emotions out on the tree. The pain from his physical injuries helped cover the emotional. He could handle that. He didn't know how to handle the turmoil or the suffocation. And here I thought you took out all your frustrations on that Kyumo shinobi. He swirled around to see Tatsuo standing 10 feet away. How did he sneak up on him? He scowled at the man that was part of his problem. Are you all right? He sneered. Why wouldn't I be? Because I can smell the tears from here. Sasuke stiffened. What tears? Now that it was brought to his attention, he felt his cheeks were wet from tears. He hadn't even realized he had been crying. When was the last time he had cried? That time at the memorial stone. He was thankful for the mask he wore, even though it did no good for Tatsuo, but at least he could keep some of his dignity. Is it because of Kyuubi's Jinchuriki? Came the whisper question. His glare narrowed, forgetting the fearsome reputation of the fox-masked man as he came within inches of him. 1. His name is Uzumaki Naruto, not Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. And 2. Why don't you mind your own fucking business? He moved around Tatsuo and went in search of someplace where he could be alone. Naruto let him go, still reeling from what happened. If it wasn't for the metallic scent of blood clinging to the tree trunk, he would consider believing it was all a dream. Why does he always have to make things more complicated? The Uchiha isn't the one that's making this more complicated, Kurama said. You are. I know. Chapter 7. Home sweet home. Finally, Sakura's voice yelled when the gates of Konoha came into view. Her pace increased, putting more space between them. Sasuke followed more at a sedate pace. Miki, Ruri, and Kyoko were a few paces behind him while him and Itachi were a good distance in the rear. Naruto eyed Konoha's gates, his steps slowing down the closer he got. Itachi attempted trying to coax him further, but it wasn't working too well. He kept shoving the eldest Uchiha's arm away and glaring certain death if he kept it up. Itachi may not be able to see his glare of death, but there was no doubt he could feel his don't fuck with me aura. And it wasn't completely Konoha that made him want to throttle someone. The other reason came down to a particular fox demon seal within, nagging him over and over and over. Tell him, 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 tell him. Kurama has been going on and on since he followed Sasuke and found him crying, and it has been driving him insane. He could have sworn the damn fox slept sometime, but knew he's been on repeat for the past 5 days straight. It made sleep nearly impossible, and with that lack of sleep brought his irritability to soar through the roof. God, if he could, he would kill the fox right about now. Arg, shut up. He screamed in his mind, hoping for some kind of mercy. He really should have known better. Tell him, 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 tell him. He mentally screamed out of frustration and lack of sleep, throwing himself on the watery floor in front of the large cage of Kurama and throwing a 2-year-old tantrum. Shikamaru. Niji-san, he heard Sakura's loud voice call. He perked up and pulled himself away from Kurama's nagging at the mention of those two names. He stood on his tippy toes and saw both Shikamaru and Niji standing in front of the gates. He jumped in and waved his arm wildly. Niji, Shika, he passed everyone and ran up to them. It's been a while, Tatsuo, Niji said with a nod. Naruto nudged his shoulder playfully. Give me a break. I saw you the last time you visited Suna. Which was what? A month ago. He grinned at the reason why Niji visited Suna so often. It could have been because of a certain red-headed Kazakage, or political business as the excuse Niji often used. He knew better though, especially when one walks down a hall and sees with their own eyes Gaara pinned against the wall with Niji's tongue shoved in his mouth. That would definitely clear up any confusion. A light blush crossed Niji's cheeks as Shikamaru sighed and murmured, "Troublesome." "Shika." He gave the taller man a hug. "It's been a while." He nodded lazily. "A year, to be exact." He yawned after so many words being said and closed his eyes again, causing him to blink from the usual behavior. He shook his head and muttered, "Some things just never change." Niji bowed respectfully as the rest of his team approached. "Kane-san, Ryutaro-san, Hiko-san, Tara-san, it's a pleasure to see you all again and well." Itachi and Ruri bowed, just as respectful as Niji had. Miki gave a two-finger salute while Kyoko ran forward and wrapped her arms around him in a hug. "I missed you, Niji-san, and all those hot yaoi moments." Niji's entire face flamed bright red. Naruto let his head fall into his hand at the usual comment from Kyoko. When it comes to yaoi, she can make some of Sasuke's fangirls look tame. Unfortunately, he had the honor of seeing that behavior once, and it gave him nightmares for a week. To make a long story short, she almost got arrested for stalking. "We might want to get going," Niji said as he turned with Kyoko securely attached to his arm. He didn't even try to dislodge her. Too much experience where that failed. "Hokage-sama is waiting for you." He knocked on the gates, and they were opened after a few moments. The whole group walked through the gates and into Konoha. "So, how do you all know each other?" Sakura asked. "We met at the Chunin exams," Itachi said, causing not only him to turn to the weasel-masked man, but for his team to also, and both Shikamaru and Niji. The last two were the only ones anyone could see the disbelief coming from. "Chunin exams?" Sasuke said for the first time since arriving. "You were all at the Chunin exams." "We weren't," exclaimed Miki, his hand pointing to himself, Kyoko, and Ruri. "Only Tatsuo and Kane were there. Akuma wasn't formed way back then." Naruto groaned softly at how much information was being told. Why did Itachi feel the need to answer Sakura's question? He glanced to the side and scowled at a group of ladies whispering to each other and occasionally pointing at them. He flipped them off, causing scandalized expressions to be directed at him. "Enjoying yourself?" Itachi asked. "Immensely," he said, grinding his teeth together to refrain from going to the next bunch of whispering villagers and killing them. God, he hated this village. How did he even manage to bring himself to enter this place? His eyes subconsciously drifted over to Sasuke, his mind giving him his reason. And that one reason could make him do practically anything. "Yes," he said, not taking his eyes off Sasuke, whose body was rigid with tension. "We were at the Chunin exams, but we didn't participate. I'm the one who stopped Gaara." He wished Sasuke didn't still wear his mask. It would have been a little easier to figure out what the Raven was feeling. "Which almost got you killed," Itachi snorted. "Yes." He pointed his finger at the older man, finally breaking the stare he had on Sasuke. "But that was the best week of sleep I had in a long time." "How old are all of you?" Sakura asked. "You don't sound that old to me." Boy, was she asking a lot of questions now that they were within the walls of Konoha. Miki and Kyoko turned to him, and he gave them a shrug as an answer. They could take it as they wanted to. It's not like they weren't already giving out information. "I am 17. Kyoko was the first to say. 21, Miki said next. Ruri sighed before saying, 20. 23, said Itachi, and then he turned to him. He glared back, knowing without seeing that Itachi was smirking. Teal Hayam, Kurama howled in his mind, making him wince at the sheer loudness of him. I'm 18. You're the same age as Shikamaru, Sasuke, and I, Sakura said. She opened her mouth again, probably to ask another question, but Niji beat her with his own as they neared the Hokage Tower. So how long are you here, and does Gaara even know? He hummed. I don't know how long we're going to be here. Tsunade-sama didn't give any details. And as for Gaara, he trailed off and gave a nervous chuckle. He dug his nails into the palm of his hands to stop himself from performing his nervous gesture. Well, I was hoping that I would send him notice of your arrival. Niji finished for him as he opened the door to the Hokage tower for them to enter. He swung his arm over Niji's shoulder while the others entered the tower. Thanks, Niji. I knew I could count on you. He walked into the tower, bringing Niji with him by the arm over his shoulder. Shikamaru walked in front of them, and the distance between them and the others in front of the brunette gradually grew larger. Shikamaru slowed his pace further until he was walking on the left side of him. He removed his arm from Niji's shoulder and waited for what they had to say. There was no other reason for them to distance him from the others if they didn't. Normally, he would think they were planning an attack, but since he trusted them, he wasn't on his guard. Why did you come back, Naruto? Shikamaru asked a little above a whisper. I have a promise to keep Tabachan, he said automatically. Niji scoffed. You're smart enough not to come here for a reason like that. If the wrong person were to find out, they'd execute you for sure. I know, but once the contract is signed, they won't be able to. He tilted his head in thought. Well, not until the job is done and I take one step out of Konoha. Shikamaru shook his head, his face full of displeasure. You're taking too big of a risk. Does it have anything to do with Uchiha? Naruto moved his gaze on the back of Sasuke. He was taking a big risk, but being near Sasuke seemed to make it worth it. He knew he was being selfish. Watching Sasuke from a different persona and not identifying himself, it wasn't fair. At that moment, though, he didn't care about being fair. He held his breath when Sasuke turned around to glance at them for a second before facing back forward when they came upon the wooden doors of the Hokage's office. He released his breath as Sakura and knocked on the doors. Komein. Tsunade's voice yelled out. Sakura opened the doors, and they all walked in. Tsunade sat behind her desk, piles of paperwork covering the surface, and behind her stood Jiraiya. Tsunade stood as he walked in, yelling, Gaki! She crossed the room and pulled him into a bone-crushing hug. The breath was knocked right out of him, and he coughed. Bah, Chan, can't be breathe. He begged Jiraiya with his eyes, even though the old man couldn't see them. He must have sensed something, because Jiraiya came up and placed his hand on Tsunade's shoulder. Tsunade, for him to live this long and then to die by your hug, it would be such a shame. That seemed to have loosened her grip around his body. He gasped for much-needed breath. Thanks, Eero. Sanin. No problem, brat, Jiraiya said with a cheesy grin. Don't want all those sacrifices at survival be for nothing, now would we? He lifted his hand to him, and he took it and shook it. Jiraiya then brought him out of Tsunade's hold and into his own hug. Thankfully, this one didn't make an attempt to crush his ribs. Glad you're still alive, kid. Huffing, he said, You think I would die so easily? Jiraiya chuckled and moved away. Well, there's a lot of people who do. Naruto stiffened and glanced at the two Konoha shinobi. Even with their masks in place, he could still sense the shock and the suspicion. Great, he thought. I should just take my mask off now. It'd probably be less suspicious. He rolled his eyes at his own thoughts. Tsunade went back around her desk and sat down in her chair. Folding her hand, she placed her chin on them and stared at him in that way she did when she knew something was up with him. How are you feeling, Tatsuo? Feeling all right? Her voice underlined with worry. Damn, he cursed. How does she always do that? I'm fine, he said with his usual brightness. Her eyes narrowed, and without taking her eyes off him, said, Terra. Fuck, she would cave. And that became apparent when Ruri fidgeted on the spot. There's a small build-up, Tsunade-sama. Naruto crossed his arms, huffed, and turned his head away from the blatant worry he saw on Tsunade's face. I'm fine, he said with finalization. Tsunade continued to stare at him for a long moment before she greeted Itachi. Kankun, I hope you're still taking good care of this misfit. Said misfit glared at her in return. Of course, Hokage-sama, Itachi said while bowing respectfully. He straightened and then bowed to Jiraiya. Jiraiya-sama. Jiraiya let out an exaggerated sigh. How many times do I have to say to call me just Jiraiya? Damn, you're almost as polite as Terra. And that was saying something. Ruri was the politest of them all. Naruto has still yet to get her to call him by his name. Jiraiya-sama, it's good to show respect to those who deserve it, Ruri said. But not painfully so, groaned Mickey, which caused Ruri to whip around in his direction and whack him hard on the arm. Ow, he yelped, rubbing the abused spot. But of course she can be disrespectful to her own team. Ruri ignored him, and Kyoko stepped forward to Jiraiya. Oh no. Jiraiya-san, Kyoko began. I was wondering if you by chance had. She was cut off by Jiraiya digging his pocket, pulling out a small book, and then throwing it at her. She caught the book, and upon the side of the front cover, let out a high-pitched squeal and bounced up and down in excitement. She launched herself at Jiraiya, hugging him around the middle, and yelled, "Thank you, Jiraiya-san. Thank you, thank you, thank you." She let him go and went back to where she previously stood, clutching the newest volume of the Yaoi edition book to her chest, like it was God's gift to her. Jiraiya pulled out another book and threw it at him. He caught it effortlessly. Glancing down at the cover, he saw that it was the same book that Kyoko had gotten. Thought you might enjoy it, since you haven't gotten any action in over 5 years. He winced at that reminded, and then cracked the book open. He looked over a random image, nodding at the graphic imagery. Snapping it shut, he said with a grin, "Thanks, Ero Senin." He lifted his cloak back and shoved the book in one of his many pockets in his pants. "Can we get back to why you're all here?" Tsunade snapped, catching everyone's attention. Naruto folded his arms over his chest. "Yes, that's what I would like to know." "You sinned." He glanced over at Sasuke and Sakura standing near the sidewall. Then with a scroll that had the vaguest details possible about why you want us here in the first place. "So now that you have us here, what do you want us to do?" His voice holding the slightest bit of annoyance. Tsunade gave a sweet smile. "What Tatsuo? Didn't like who I sent?" He glared at her smiling face. "You're not going to win me over with a guilt trip." He closed his eyes and groaned silently at his own stupidity. Why can't he think before he speaks? Here he opened his eyes, only to see Tsunade's smile had grown. He scowled. "The reason why I sent for you is because the Chunin exams are approaching in a week, and I need your and your team's strength for extra protection. We will accommodate you all with rooms, food, and anything else you may require." He smiled sardonically. "I'm going to take it that's our payment." And when her smile had turned all teeth, he knew he was right. He sighed, "This is going to suck." Tell him, 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 tell him. Arg, when are you going to be silent? When you tell him the truth. Tell him, tell him, tell him, tell him, tell him, tell him, tell him. Naruto winced at the sudden increase of volume that Kurama was putting into it now. Each time it seemed like the volume got louder, until he couldn't take any more. All right, I'll tell him. Just shut up, he hollered while he gripped his hair tightly. Almost immediately Kurama went silent. He breathed a sigh of relief at the silence in his mind. Oh, thank God. Kurama snickered. I wouldn't be thanking God yet, kid. With that, Naruto realized what he had done. Shit. He glanced up. The feeling of several stares and the sound of snickers had him cringing. Tsunade gave him a look of pure amusement. Tell what to who, Brad? He swallowed deeply, trying to moisten his suddenly dry throat. Nothing, he squeaked out. Kai, Kurama warned. Wait, he quickly said. I will tell him. So please don't start up again. Just let me figure out how to tell him, okay? It's easy. Walk up to him and tell him. It's as simple as that. It's not as easy as that, Kurama. Although I wish it was. Whatever, as long as you tell him in a reasonable amount of time. He physically nodded as he nervously laughed and resisted from raising his hand to the back of his head. So where are we going to stay? He asked, hoping to redirect the conversation away from him. If you weren't yelling out for no reason, you would have heard that you were staying at the Uchiha compound, she said, her smile turning. If it was all possible, even eviler. If Naruto didn't want to draw any more attention toward himself, he would have yelled and screamed at having to stay at the last place he wanted to be. And why wasn't Sasuke yelling and arguing for him anyway? He turned to Sasuke, his body just as rigid since entering Konoha, but his hands gripped his arms so tight that he wouldn't be surprised if he had deep bruises. Yeah, obviously Sasuke wanted them in his house as much as he wanted to be there, but also wasn't willing to risk the wrath of the Hokage. Couldn't really blame him there. Fine, he grudgingly agreed. This meant that telling the youngest Uchiha the truth would come sooner than his more favorable later. Good, you all are probably tired. She said her next words to Sasuke. Uchiha, why don't you show them the way and give them rooms? Sasuke stalked to the doors, yanked them open, and walked out of the office. Miki, Kyoto, and Ruri followed Sasuke as he brought out a scroll from his back pocket and threw it at Tsunade. Already signed by us, he said. All you need to do is sign yourself. He then went to Shikamaru and Niji, just remembering about everything they found about the Bijou and Jinchurikis, and said, Can you two come over tomorrow? I need your help sorting through some things we found on a mission. He looked directly at Niji before continuing in a whisper, It involves Gaara. Niji stood up straighter, his concern showing on his face. I'll be there. When it came to Gaara, the man would probably go to hell itself if he had to. You know I'll be there, Shikamaru said lazily, but he could hear his curiosity. Great, I'll see you guys later then. He turned around, headed to the open doors. He lifted his hand and waved behind him. See ya, Ero Sennin, Bachan, he yelled over his shoulder as he exited the of Chapter 8. Broken Mask. Sasuke laid on his navy-covered bed within his darkened room. His arms were under his head, and he stared up at the ceiling. He wore comfortable sweatpants and a t-shirt, but the restlessness in his body prevented him from falling asleep. Not even the cool breeze flowing through the open window could coax him into slumber. And it all revolved around one fox-masked man. So many questions revolved around him. So many questions and so much speculation and a little bit of hope. He let out a frustrated sigh and sat up on the side of his bed. His feet grazed the cold, wooden floor as he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He stood, flipped the light switch on, and sat back down. He lowered his face to the palm of his hands and rubbed hard. His head tilted, and he rested his cheek against his hand as his eyes fell upon his night table beside his bed. He stared at the drawer for a long moment before reaching out and pulling the drawer open. Inside the drawer was filled with various papers, pencils, and other odds and ends. He pushed some papers over to the side to reveal a hidden upside-down picture frame. He grabbed the frame and brought it out from inside the drawer. He hesitated before he flipped it over, revealing two boys lounging beneath a tree. The raven-haired boy in the picture sat staring at the sleeping form of the blonde boy leaning against his shoulder. He stared impassively at peaceful Naruto in the picture, like he's done a million times before. His chest constricted from the emotions passing through him at just seeing the image of his best friend. Lover? He scowled and placed the picture haphazardly back in the drawer. He then shut the drawer with more force than he intended. After he ran his hand through his tousled hair, he stood and went to his bedroom door. Opening it, he walked out into the darkened hallway. His steps were silent on the wooden floor. He passed the room that held Tatsuo and paused. He stared at the closed door, but then forced himself to continue down the hallway and downstairs. The last step creaked as he reached the bottom and turned toward the partially open dining room. At the table sat an Akuma member with boxes and piles of paper piled all over the top. He walked along the rectangular table, glancing at the person to see which member it was. The weasel mask, Kane. He didn't know if being near the man that seemed closest to Tatsuo was a good or bad thing. He continued to the kitchen and was mildly surprised that a pot of coffee was already brewed. He grabbed a mug and poured himself some of the hot liquid. He took a sip without adding any sugar or cream. He preferred his coffee black. The stronger, the better. He needed it. Taking another sip, he went back out into the dining room and sat opposite from Kane. His eyes skimmed over everything that littered the table. There were 11 different piles, each pile with a picture of one of the Jinchuriki at the bottom of each. His sight zeroed in on one particular pile when he caught small parts of bright, blonde hair peeking out from the printed pages. "What are you doing up?" Kane asked without pausing. "I could ask you the same thing," came the automatic response. Kane placed a small piece of paper, looking more like scrap, on Gar's pile before saying, "I don't sleep much." "Neither do I," he thought as he took another sip from his mug. It took Kane placing another piece of paper on Naruto's pile for him to ask, "What are you doing?" "Sorting." The short answer had him scowling, which had Kane elaborating. These papers, indicating the considerable size pile off to the sides of him on the floor, were located in a hidden room at that mansion, and in our rush, we couldn't exactly keep them in order. He placed another paper on one of the other pictures he didn't recognize. "Ichiman." Silence followed until Kane held the picture in his hand and headed toward Naruto's pile. The contents of the picture caught his interest, and he snatched the picture out of Kane's hold. In the picture, Naruto sat on a ledge of some building, staring up at the night sky. But it was Naruto that drew his complete focus. He looked older, years older. His breath caught at the proof that Naruto had lived, that he could still be alive, that he could be upstairs. "You don't want to hurt him again. Now, how do you, Naruto?" He shoved the picture at Kane. "Is he Tatsuo?" Kane didn't even look at the picture. Instead, he stared at him with a piercing gaze. "And what makes you think I'll tell you? If you don't, then you're telling me that it is him by your silence. Then that's foolish of you." Kane grabbed the picture out of his hand and placed it on Naruto's pile. "I might not tell you just to screw with your head. You do seem desperate to find him. It would be all too easy. No, I think you must figure this one out all on your own." He leaned forward. "I'll give you a small bit of advice, though. It's best to look underneath the underneath. Have a good night." He went back to sorting, silently ending the conversation. Sasuke glared, his scowl deepening when the man continued to ignore him. He pushed his chair back roughly and stood. His glare never left Kane, who appeared completely unaffected, and bit his tongue to keep himself from doing something he might get in trouble with the Hokage about. And he thought attacking one of the members of the team she just signed a contract with would classify as that. Gritting his teeth, he stalked out of the kitchen and back up to his bedroom. Back and forth he paced. Excitement buzzed in his veins, but the anger sizzling through his blood dulled it down. Kane hadn't denied that Naruto was alive. He hadn't denied that Naruto might be Tatsuo. Naruto might be Tatsuo. He has been thinking it since getting in contact with Akuma, but now what had seemed impossible was turning possible. He thought through all the interactions he had with Tatsuo, from the fox mask that connected him to Kyuubi to those ridiculous ramen cup boxers. He stopped and closed his eyes. I'm such a fool. Only one idiot would wear those type of boxers. The same person he thought he would never see again. His eyes burned from his Sharingan activating, his anger rising to dangerous levels as he shoved the night table over in a violent rage, sending it and everything on top of it crashing loudly to the floor. Seconds later, the sound of doors opened and several pairs of feet pounding on the floor. He remained motionless in the middle of the room, glaring at the door as it burst open with Tara in the lead. "Uchiha-san, are you all right?" she asked in worry with a kunai in her hand. Tatsuo, or should he say Naruto, came in next, his daggers ready in his hands. His body remained tense as his head moved back and forth. Then the tension released marginally and his daggers disappeared. "I got woken up over a night table." "Well," came Ryutaro's voice from the doorway with a half-asleep Hiko leaning on him to remain standing. "At least that night table knows we're here to protect it." Tara and Naruto turned their heads to Ryutaro, and then Naruto shook his head and groaned. Sasuke watched with rampant attention as he lifted his arm and rubbed the back of his neck. That did it. That familiar action had his body moving on its own. He viciously punched the side of Naruto's face, the porcelain mask biting into his hand as Naruto stumbled through the doorway and crashed into the wall across the hall. Ryutaro and Tara looked about ready to intervene until Naruto waved his arm, stopping them. "What's wrong, Naruto?" Sasuke sneered, his whole body trembling with rage. Is something the matter? All this time, all this time he's been alive, and he made everyone believe he wasn't. He made me believe, even after everything. Did all mean nothing? Did he mean nothing? Shit, Ryutaro muttered. To say that Naruto was nervous would be a complete and utter understatement. He was uniquely terrified at the moment. How'd he find out? Those damn pieces. It all revolved around the pieces of the puzzle that consisted of his life. Once those pieces were put together, then the truth could be easily found out. And goddamn, Sasuke was halfway there in completing the complicated puzzle. And by the way he looked, he didn't like it. Not one bit. He inched his way down the hall, trying to put as much distance between him and the raging Uchiha. With the shock of the moment, he hadn't denied the name that Sasuke called him, which the Raven seemed to have noticed. And, if it was even possible, flared his anger even hotter. Kurama, what do you think I should do? Run, came the curt reply. Run? You want me to run? Damn straight. He's out for blood. Your blood, which includes my blood. You chicken shit of furball. You're the one who told me to tell him. But you didn't, did you? He found out on his own, which really you should have realized he would, and I'm not willing to deal with him. You're not the one that has to deal with him, I do. Yes, but I'm the one who has to heal your sorry ass when he viciously maims you. Damn, the fox had a point there, but still he mentally growled at Kurama for his brilliant input. He bit the inside of his cheek, trying to figure out what the best way would be to handle this. Nothing good came to mind, though, but the option of running looked better and better as that murderous aura kept taunting his self-preservation. He swallowed deeply, hoping to moisten his dry throat so he could say something, anything. But every time he tried to open his mouth to make some sort of syllable, nothing came out. His mouth just hung open shamelessly. Within a blink of the eye, Sasuke stood right in front of him, his fist slamming an inch away from his head and right into the wall. Naruto cringed, but didn't flinch a muscle. He remained perfectly still, not knowing what to do or say. What was he supposed to say with a pair of Sharingan spinning furiously at the eye holes of his mask? Think we should intervene? Only his enhanced hearing enabled him to hear Kyoko. Are you mad? Mickey whispered back. You actually want to get between those two? I swear, you hit your head when you were young. He had to agree with Mickey. One doesn't cross an Uchiha when they're in a rage. Unless you're an idiot, which many have proclaimed him to be. Naruto, or another Uchiha with a death wish. Naruto closed his eyes from the fresh spike of anger igniting in Sasuke's blood-red eyes. Thanks, Tachi, he silently congratulated the eldest Uchiha for confirming the Raven's suspicions. That really helped me. The sound of crunching, and then the smell of blood reached his sensitive ears and nose. He shifted his eyes to the hand still on the wall and had a fight with himself to stop Sasuke from hurting himself. I think you should be resting, Itachi continued. Hasn't Kurama-sama been keeping you up lately? Sasuke stiffened even further, causing him to focus on him for a second before focusing on Itachi. That offered escape route sounded awesome at that moment. He nodded, scooting himself out from between the wall and Sasuke, who appeared rooted like steel to the spot. He went against his shinobi instincts and turned his back to Sasuke, heading to his room. After passing through the doorway, he shut the door behind him and locked it. Itachi stood close to the top of the stairs with his shoulder pressed to the wall and his arms crossed throughout most of the encounter. But when Sasuke pulled his hand out of the wall and started to follow after Naruto, he decided to intervene. He intercepted Sasuke, undeterred by the vicious glare he received. Get out of my way, he ground out. He made no move to remove himself from in front of his little brother. You need to calm down, Uchiha, before you even attempt in speaking with Naruto, or to be near him for that matter. Sasuke let out an inhuman growl that he's rarely ever heard from any other person besides Naruto. This has nothing to do with you. He took a threatening step forward, but all it did was cause Mickey to speak up. If you want to fight, Uchiha, Mickey along with Kyoko and Ruri took out a kunai each. Then we'll be glad to give you one if you so foolishly attack Naruto. A drip hitting the floor caught his attention to Sasuke's clenched hand, where blood came from an unknown injury. Sasuke abruptly turned and stalked back to his bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to cause a crack down the middle and hang partly off its hinges. Well, that didn't go as he originally planned, but he guessed it would have to work. At least Sasuke now knows some of what he needed to be told. If only the rest would be as easy as this seemed to be. That was interesting, Mickey said, diminishing the awkward silence that settled. A loud yawn followed that echoed through the entire hall. All looked at Kyoko, who glanced between them. What? I'm tired. She yawned again as she turned on her heels and went back to her room. Night, she said over her shoulder. Ruri sighed. I'm hoping that this concludes the night. She turned, but before she went back to her room, she said, good night. Mickey shrugged and stood in front of him. So, want to play poker? Itachi lifted an eyebrow in question. Even though Mickey couldn't feel it, he still said, I'm too wired to sleep now. Itachi nodded in understanding, and they both moved downstairs to clean up the kitchen table in order to begin the all-night tournament. Also to secretly make sure that Sasuke didn't try and interact with Naruto. Chapter 9. A Day of Dying Tears. 6 years ago, Naruto turned over on his forest green bed, unconsciously kicking the comforter off while he shoved his arm beneath his head in an attempt to coax himself back into a deep sleep and back into the dream of pale arms and dark eyes. That planned thought slowly moved out of his grasp as his mind crept back to the surface of awareness. He cracked an eye open, only to close it again before cracking both eyes open and blinking to get them to focus. He rolled onto his back and lifted his arm to his forehead to block the faint light streaming through the crack in the curtains. Once his eyes got used to the harsh morning light, he let his arm flop onto the mattress. He stared up at the cracked and yellowing ceiling. After a moment of staring, he cocked his head sideways to take a glance at the clock on the night table. He groaned at the time, an hour before he had to be at the bridge. Damn, I could have slept longer. Why couldn't I get back into that dream? He sighed and sat up, slouching as he moved his legs to the side and off the bed. He rotated his neck in a circular motion to loosen the muscles, and then stood while bringing his arms above his head to stretch the stiffness out of his body. Bringing his arms down, he used one hand to rub the sleep out of his eyes as he yawned widely. He went to the window and pulled back the curtains, allowing light to fully fill the bedroom. He squinted his eyes as he gazed outside at the dark clouds off on the horizon. Today was going to be a bad day. He already knew it. He came to the conclusion a long time ago that the worst of things happen when the day looked shitty, and today did not look bright. He turned away from the depressing sight and headed to the bathroom. So, what do you think is going to happen today? Kurama asked as he stuck his thumbs in the waistband of his gray sweatpants. Pulling the sweatpants and boxers down in one go, he responded, don't know. Pick your poison. He then stripped off his orange t-shirt. Kurama gave a dry chuckle. No, I prefer not. We can just pretend that today is going to be fine. Naruto snorted. Nothing is ever just fine for us. He stepped in the chipped blue and green shower and turned the water on, shivering when the coldness hit his warm skin. Fine, you have a point there. As unusual as that may be, he mentally glared at the fox, who in return grinned at him. Anyway, are you going to tell that stuck-up Uchiha today? Tell him what? He pretended not knowing as he reached for the shampoo. He squirted a fair share of the gel into his hand before rubbing them together and running his hands through his wet hair. Tell him what? Kurama said, pronouncing each word slowly. Now I know you could be a little slow, but damn, forgetting about those pesky feelings of yours toward that ass. I admit, I'm impressed. I didn't know you were that stupid. He gritted his teeth, not wanting to have this conversation. I'm not forgetting about them. I just don't want to talk about it. He rinsed his hair a little more roughly than what was needed. All right, fine, Keith. I still don't know what you see in him, though. Maybe it's his ass. He definitely has a nice one. Naruto rolled his eyes and finished up cleaning himself. He turned the water off before stepping out with water rolling down his body and dripping on the floor. Grabbing the towel from the towel rack, he dried off and then wrapped the towel around his waist. He went back to his bedroom and got dressed in his orange jumpsuit. He grimaced a little. He did favor orange, but the damn jumpsuit caused even him to cringe. But the garment was part of his obnoxious persona he shows to the world and couldn't just throw it away or burn it like he really too. He continued with his morning routine, cooking and eating breakfast, brushing his teeth, strapping his weapon pouches on, and lastly tying his attire to his forehead. Now he stood in front of his closed door, softly banging his head against the worn wood to try and get his mind in the right place. Normally, this wasn't part of his routine, but lately it's been harder to act cheerful when his surroundings cause the opposite effect. Banging his head helped center himself in a way. He banged his head a couple more times before straightening back up. If he'd done the action any longer, a red mark would have appeared and unwanted questions would be asked. He breathed in deeply and exhaled slowly before he plastered that goofy grin that annoyed so many. Opening the door, he walked out of his safe zone and into what he's only imagined as hell. Naruto weaved through the crowded street with a grin that didn't falter even with many disgusted glares directed at him and the rude comments his sensitive ears picked up. He stopped caring a long time ago. Instead, he hid behind a mask of foolishness that disarmed some and caused others to overlook him. There were only a few times where he actually felt the same as to what he showed. And those times are when he fought with his teammate, Sasuke. All the challenges he proposed had all been real, and all his loudness and blunders around the Raven were unique. Not much was faked when he was around him, and that's one of the reasons why he enjoyed being around him so much. He didn't really have to pretend. Sasuke made him real. A sharp pain came from the side of his head when a rock hit him. His foot faltered in his next step while his hand twitched in reflex to defend himself. He fought down his instinct to turn and hit whoever had thrown the rock, and instead continued to walk in the direction of the bridge where Team 7 always met up. The path that led to the bridge was only 10 feet away when an Umbu shinobi jumped in front of him, blocking his way. He subconsciously took a step back, expecting some sort of violence from the shinobi, but became mildly surprised when nothing happened. "What do you want?" he asked tersely, keeping his body tense in case an unexpected attack occurred. "The Hokage wants to see you," the Umbu shinobi said with obvious contempt. Once said, the man disappeared without another word. Naruto released a sigh of relief at not being injured during the short encounter, while his mind wondered why the old man wanted to see him and now. The old man knew he had a team meeting, but who was he to argue? With a final longing look at the path to the bridge, he turned on his heels and headed toward the Hokage Tower. It took him about 10 minutes, but he reached the Hokage Tower with no problems. He entered the tower and went up the flight of stairs to the Hokage's office. For a long moment, he stared at the double doors, having a feeling of dread build in the pit of his stomach. "Come in, Naruto," an elderly voice said from the other side of the door, bring him out of his thoughts. He took a deep breath before grabbing the metal handle and opening the door. He poked his head through the opening before walking in, stopping once he reached the front of the desk where the old man, Sarutobi, sat. "What did you want to see me about, Sarutobi Gigi?" he said, shoving his hands in his pockets of his jumpsuit with a grin. A sadness passed through the Hokage's eyes that made the dread in his stomach gain weight like lead, but his grin never wavered. Sarutobi placed his hands on the desk and leaned forward a little. "Yes, but how are you, Naruto?" He nodded. "Fine." Although the weak smile as those sad eyes lowered to his desk caused his grin to crack. "What?" That gaze lifted again, and the emotions flooding through them had his grin to fall completely. "The council want to speak with you, and I'm going to warn you now, it's not good." No, today definitely wasn't going to be a good day. Sasuke took yet another glance down the path that led to the bridge, wondering where Naruto could be. The time for Kakashi to arrive, which meant an hour over the time they were meant to be there, had almost been met, and still there was no show of the blonde. Naruto had always been on time, except once, but he had only been 10 minutes late. Did something happen to him? He thought, causing a niggle of worry to blossom. "I wonder where Naruto is," Sakura asked, causing his teeth on edge, either from the annoyance in her voice or the worry easily heard underneath it. He glared at her, but that got interrupted when Kakashi appeared in a puff of smoke on the bridge's railing in a squat with his book in hand and his attention on the pages. "Yo," he greeted without taking his eyes from the book. "They were doing construction on my row." He stopped mid-sentence and glanced up at the spot where Naruto usually stood. His visible eyebrow rose. "Where's Naruto?" He shrugged. "We don't know." He kept his voice even, not hinting at the worry that rose with every minute that Naruto remained absent. "Well, I guess we're just going to have to train without him," Kakashi said, almost causing him to groan. That meant he had to train with Sakura. Naruto gave him a challenge. Sakura was merely a pest, and with his mind distracted with his missing blonde, he probably wouldn't remember to hold back. He'll probably show up later on. Kakashi jumped off the railing and headed toward the training grounds. Sakura followed after him, while Sasuke took one last glance down the path before doing the same. The clouds throughout the day, causing the air to become chillier as the atmosphere prepared to nourish the earth with rain. The villagers hurried to finish their day's activities before the downpour began, but there was one that the natural occurrence didn't even register with. Naruto walked down the street with his head down, his blonde bangs covering his eyes as he took each step toward an unknown location. He didn't know where he would go, but he knew he had to keep moving. Because if he stopped, if he let it sink in, he didn't know what would happen, who he might hurt or kill, because that urge ran strongly through him. He wanted to hurt them as much as they were hurting him. He wanted to show them exactly what kind of demon he could really be. But he wouldn't. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction in seeing him lose his sanity. He wouldn't let them see him break. So close. He could only take so much. He could only be strong for so long. He didn't want to be strong. Not now. He just wanted to feel something. Something that wasn't faked or exaggerated. Something he could grasp onto to keep him sane. Something that was real. What did I stop? He asked himself as his tunnel vision broadened to take in his surroundings. He blinked. Somehow his feet subconsciously led him to the entrance of the Uchiha compound. He stared at the large Uchiha fan fastened to the archway for a long while before walking under and toward the residence of his teammate. Naruto fidgeted in the chair he sat in that was positioned intimidatingly in the middle of the oval stone room. 3 rows tiered in front of him, each seat filled with a council member. Old man Sarutobi stood to his left with his hand on his shoulder, either for support or to restrain him. He didn't know which, but either was possible with those triumphant grins half of the council's faces displayed. He didn't bother to put up his facade. It wasn't like it would do any good. So instead he stared blankly at the men and women, waiting for whatever judgment they had in store for him. Uzumaki Naruto began an elderly man with one of the most malicious grins. "You are hereby banned from Konohagakure. You are to be outside the walls of Konoha by sunrise tomorrow. If you are not, then you are to be executed." His voice held a deep satisfaction. Ball threatened to be released. Was this really happening? He quickly looked to the Hokage in a futile hope for this all to be a sick joke, but when the old man refused to look at him, he knew it wasn't. This was really happening. He should have known their joy would only bring him the worst kind of misery. They were banning him from his home village. His life. It may not have been much of one, but it's all he knew. And now he was being stripped away from it by biased assholes. "Why?" he said in a whisper. He glared up at the council members with barely controlled rage, which had their grins falling. "What the hell did I ever do to you?" The hand on his shoulder tightened to the point of bruising, keeping him from rushing to his feet. "You killed hundreds, you demon," another member accused. A middle-aged woman this time. "You are nothing but an eyesore to this village. You're just lucky that we were generous enough to give you a chance at living instead of executing you right off." Naruto found himself laughing manically at the whole thing. They were banning him for something he had nothing to do with, something he had no control over. The expression fell flat as he shoved the hand from shoulder and stood. He turned and walked towards the door, pushing the agony eating at him and shoving it to the far corner of himself. His hand gripped the cold metal of the hand and opened the door. But before he could exit, one council member had to rub salt in the wound. Out by sunrise, Sasuke walked through the entrance of the Uchiha compound, heading for his home. His hands were in his pockets while he stared unfocused in front of him. I checked everywhere, he thought somberly. Naruto never showed up to training, and he couldn't help but think that something terrible had happened to him. With that heavy on his mind, along with many different scenarios playing out, the training session had been pointless. He couldn't focus on anything. Thank God that Kakashi had gotten fed up also and decided to end the training early. Because his patience had run so low, he slipped in his control and punched Sakura with his full strength, sending her soaring across the field. Once freedom was granted, he rushed to the most likely place the blonde would be at, his apartment. But no one was there as he hoped, even after he broke in. He then checked Ichiraku, then the Hokage Mountain, and then several other places he thought Naruto might be. Hell, he even checked many of the places twice to ensure he hadn't missed him. But still, there was no Naruto. He couldn't find him. He sighed forlornly as he brought out his keys and unlocked his front door. Where the hell is he? He opened the door and walked in, closing it behind him. He slipped his feet out of his shoes and then went up the stairs sluggishly. Once he reached the top of the stairs was when he took notice of the chakra signature of someone else. He tensed until he recognized the signature as the same person he's been looking for most of the day. Growling low in his throat, he followed the chakra's signature to his bedroom. He threw the door open and yelled, "Dope," as he stalked through. Naruto sat on the other side of his bed with his back to him. Relief flooded him, although the blonde's stillness unnerved him a little, since he didn't even flinch at his abrupt entrance. That relief quickly turned to anger. "Have you been here all day?" Naruto turned to him, his face unnaturally blank. It softened his anger and caused a bit of his worry to resurface. No, I haven't." "You didn't show up to training," he said, eyeing Naruto. "Where the hell you been?" He shrugged. "Around." "Why? Were you worried?" Sasuke started at the question. "Why would you think I'd be worried about you? And now that I'm thinking about it, why are you even in my house?" Hoping to lead the conversation away from how he felt about his teammate. Naruto shrugged again. "Don't know." His features not once displaying emotion. "My feet led me here." He then rose from the bed and came around it. "Now Sasuke, if you only had one more day to your life, what would you do?" The last of his anger simmered down and vanished, only to be replaced with confusion. What was going on with him? He never acted like this. It was odd, seeing and hearing the blonde being so serious, and yet at the same time, it fitted him. But why today? What happened today to make him act this way? And why ask a question like that? He opened his mouth, but stopped himself from voicing the first thing that came to mind. There was no way he would say that to Naruto, especially when he was a part of it. Instead, he asked, "Why are you asking?" Naruto glanced away, but he still caught a glimpse of the sadness in his sapphire orbs. "Do you want to know what I would do?" he asked as he took small steps toward him. A shiver went down his spine at how sensual those words sounded, and he took a deep breath to calm his growing nerves. Those nerves only doubled the closer the blonde came to him. He stopped when he stood only inches from him. His first instinct told him to take a step back, but he was too stubborn to back down, so he stood his ground. Naruto's gaze moved up to his own. "Do you?" he insisted as he lifted his hand and gently touched the side of his face, causing his heart to pound even faster. In the span of a second, Naruto had closed the distance between them and pressed his lips to his. He froze, his brain not quite caught up with reality. Was Naruto actually kissing him? That couldn't be. That only happened in his best dreams. Yet it felt real. Those soft lips, the near hyperventilating, and the problem growing in his pants. Dear God, if a small kiss affected him this much, what would a full-blown one do? It felt like as quick as Naruto's lips were on as they were gone. That was short. Far too short in his opinion. But what came out of the blonde's mouth next near stopped his heart for good. "I love you." Naruto breathed against his lips. He swore he was receiving more shocks in one day than he had in years. The tan hand lowered from his face, falling limp by his side. You probably think this is just another one of those confessions from an admirer. No, didn't even cross his mind. He was more focused on the fact that the whole thing was happening to begin with. But I don't care. I know what I feel. And I didn't just look at you and fall in love with you at first sight. I hated you at first sight. You were a prick, asshole, bastard, and few other words I won't go into. But then I got to know you, and you weren't as bad as I first thought. Still a bastard, though. A small smile graced his features as he averted his eyes to the floor. He lifted his hand and rubbed the back of his head. His nervous habit. That told more than anything he said. It was all real. The point is, this feeling, this love for you, is real. You and this feeling are the only things that seem real in my life. I just wanted to let you know. His voice trailed off into a whisper. His shocked silence had Naruto fidget before he muttered, "Yeah, I'll be going now." Like hell. His hand flew out as Naruto headed to leave the room and grab his forearm, stopping him. Running off of pure instinct, he tugged and crashed his lips to Naruto's while using his other hand to slam the bedroom door shut. Naruto gasped into the kiss, utterly shocked at what was taking place. This wasn't how he expected the boy to react to his confession. He didn't want him to react this way. But his eyes went against him and fluttered closed at the feeling of euphoria. Even if he knew he shouldn't let this continue. Even if he knew it would only kill him even more when he had to leave. He wanted this desperately. He wanted Sasuke, even if it was only for one night. Sasuke nibbled on his bottom lip, silently asking for entrance, which he more than willingly gave. He tangled his hands in raven locks while Sasuke's hands encircled his waist and pulled him flush against his body. He moaned as a tongue invaded his mouth and explored every crevice. Tentatively, he pushed his tongue against Sasuke's, and when he heard a rumbled groan, he took it as a good sign and repeated the action with more confidence. Soon their tongues were sensually massaging each other like longtime lovers, the passion between them thickening. Sasuke's hand found its way under his shirt, causing shivers of pleasure to shoot across his skin as it moved up his chest and to his nipple. He gasped in surprise by not only the sharp sensation of his nipple being played with, but by Sasuke's other hand grabbing his ass and roughly pulling him forward, pressing his erection against the incredibly hard one of the Uchihas. Mind cloudy and body feverish, it was all becoming too much for Naruto. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Sasuke was his drug. He lowered his hands from the raven's neck and down to the hem of his shirt. He steadily lifted the piece of material up until it reached the armpits, and Sasuke detached himself from him, causing him to whine softly and lift his arms for him to take the shirt off the rest of the way. He discarded the shirt to the floor, his eyes not once leaving the pale chest exposed to him. The beauty of the porcelain-like skin, the lean muscles, and the rise and fall of his chest was breathtaking. His hand ascended in pure curiosity, tentatively touching the skin that jumped under his fingertips. He then explored fully, spanning both his hands and taking in every crevice. All the while, Sasuke kept his eyes glued to Naruto, watching his every move and every emotion that passed his features. When love and lust became featured emotions, his pulse spiked, and then his breath hitched at the same time those hands touched him so innocently. Those hands ran all along his chest before falling down to the waistband of his shorts, where they traced the skin just above. Naruto leaned forward and licked the skin along his neck, causing him to take a sharp breath. He closed his eyes and moaned when that simple lick turned into sucks and nips. Those sinful lips made a hot trail down to his nipple, wrapping around and licking the erect nub. The treatment drew out a long groan from him, his hand entangling in blonde locks as Naruto switched to his other nipple and gave it the same wondrous torture. His hold in the blonde hair tightened and pulled him back, detaching those delectable lips from his being. He gazed into half-lidded sapphires that were glazed over in desire as he unzipped the orange jacket, revealing a black shirt underneath. He discarded the jacket and then pushed his hand underneath the black material. His desire heightened at the feeling of the toned flesh and the heat radiating off the tan body. He stripped off the shirt and began devouring the expanse of his neck while slowly leading him backwards towards the bed. Naruto gasped when he fell back on the bed with him on top of him, not willing to release his flesh from his mouth. He then kissed and licked a trail down to the waistband of his orange pants. He stared at the bulge tinting the blonde's pants, licking his lips at the evidence of his dobe's desire for him. He pressed the palm of his hand against the bulge, and he got rewarded with Naruto arching off the bed and moaning his name. That moan went straight down to his cock as he leaned his forehead on the blonde's taut stomach and closed his eyes to keep himself under control. A hand carded through his hair, and he looked up to see sapphire eyes watching him. He topped the top button of his pants, silently asking Naruto for permission before continuing. When he received a nod, he unzipped the pants and pulled them off. He crawled back up Naruto's body and captured his lips in a passionate kiss. Naruto then reached down and unbuckled his pants and pushed them down as far as his arms would take them before using his legs to finish the job. Hips lifted up into his, causing them both to moan in the kiss. He copied Naruto's actions, giving his own thrust and creating blissful friction. Their slow rhythm grew faster, more frantic. Hands roamed each other's sweat-glistening bodies. He moved from the bruised lips, nibbled his way down his jaw, and settled at his neck, alternating between sucking and biting until there was a nice mark clear to be seen. Sasuke, moaned Naruto between heavy breaths. I need more. Sasuke couldn't help but to smirk at the huskiness of the blonde's voice and that he was the one to cause him to writhe underneath him. Although that smirk soon fell and was replaced with a frown when he remembered that he didn't exactly know what he was doing. He knew the basics of foreplay, but anything beyond that he was running on pure speculation. And speculation alone. He pushed himself up with his arms, so he towered over the blonde while his hips continued to rock. He stayed that way for a long moment, transfixed at the sight lying below him. He didn't want to stop, even if he knew basically nothing about sex. He didn't think he could anyway, not having been wanting it for so long. Naruto looked up at him with glazed eyes filled with confusion. Sasuke, you do know I really don't know what I'm doing, right? He said a little awkwardly, quite surprised with himself that he could pull off a whole coherent sentence. Naruto lifted and ran his hand down the side of his face. It's not like I would know that you're doing something wrong. That did it, speculation be damned. He'd just have to wing it, he hoped. Sasuke climbed off of Naruto, who rose up and braced himself up on his elbows as he stood at the side of the bed. He hooked his fingers in the waistband of the blonde's boxers and slowly slid them down. Naruto assisted him by lifting his hips, and he was mindful of his erection as he took them off completely, leaving Naruto sprawled on the bed naked. His breath got caught in his throat at every gorgeous inch of skin available to him. You're beautiful, he said, causing Naruto's face to light up bright red. Without taking his eyes from Naruto, he slipped his thumbs in the waistband of his boxers and purposely pulled them down slowly. He hissed when the cool air hit his erect member as he let his boxers fall the rest of the way to the floor. He smirked with how transfixed Naruto looked, just as much as he was, as he stepped out of his boxers. He climbed back on the bed and over Naruto. Their erections grazed, sending a sharp spark of pleasure through him, causing not only him to moan, but Naruto also when their lips met. Sasuke, Naruto moaned out. Take me and make me why yours. Sasuke had no idea how erotic those words could be until right then. He pulled back and looked around the room in search for any kind of lotion or something similar. But damn it, he never kept anything like that in his room or in his house for that matter. He never had any use for that stuff until now. Oh well, he'll just have to use the next best thing, his saliva. It seemed that single time he got his hands on Kakashi's book would actually come in handy. He brought his hand up, with 3 fingers sticking out, to his mouth and was prepared to moisten them himself. But then a different thought came to mind. A thought he would love to be made reality. Everything else was coming true, why not this? So, He lowered that same hand to the front of the blonde's mouth and said, "Suck." Naruto only looked up at him with confusion for a second before he gripped his wrist and slid his tongue along the 3 digits. Those sapphires kept eye contact with him even as his mouth enclosed around his fingers and slid them deep in his hot cavern. Fuck, if that wasn't the hottest thing he's ever seen. If only he thought of presenting something other than his fingers. Now that would be a sight to be seen. But that could wait until next time. When he couldn't take any more of the teasing that he was pretty sure Naruto was doing on purpose, he retracted his fingers with an audible pop. He lowered his hand, so his fingers were right in front of the blonde's entrance, lightly prodding the soft muscle. He heard that this was supposed to hurt the one who bottoms, but that was one of the things he wasn't too sure about, so he would have to see. He pushed his fingers slowly past the ring of muscles, keeping his eyes closely on Naruto's face for any signs of pain. Naruto whimpered, and then bit his bottom lip as he moved his finger in and out. When he added another finger, the discomfort on his face doubled, and he paused in his ministrations. "Do you want me to stop? Please say no." He wanted Naruto so badly, but he wouldn't force him to do anything he didn't want to. Pain shined in sapphire eyes, but he shook his head and pushed down on the fingers still in him like he was proving his decision. Sasuke took that as a sign to continue and moved his fingers again. He added a third, scissoring rapidly as he stretched the narrow passage. His heart clenched from another whimper coming from Naruto, his eyes securely shut and his hands gripping the blanket. Sasuke plunged his fingers in deep, resulting in Naruto to scream out and arch off the bed, which in turn startled the fuck out of him. Thinking he'd hurt his dope, he pulled his fingers completely out and ignored the whine that came from the blonde as he said, "Naruto." He caressed the whiskered cheek. "Dope, you alright?" Naruto opened his eyes lazily and grinned, pulling the now confused Sasuke into a deep kiss. When they separated, Naruto said that felt good, which caused him to lift his brow in wonder. "Do you still want me to?" He asked to make sure that he hadn't misinterpreted anything. "Please." He kissed Naruto as he repositioned himself between the blonde's legs, who spread them wider to accommodate him. Using his hand, he rubbed his cock to spread the pre-cum along his length before he lined up at Naruto's entrance and began to press forward. Pleasure he's never experienced before shot through him from where he was being molded around perfectly, engulfing his length in a blissful heat. He longed to bury himself in Naruto in one quick thrust, but he wouldn't. He wouldn't hurt him like that, especially not with the whimpers penetrating through his haze of pleasure. It hurt. Damn, did it hurt. Naruto held his eyes shut tight, trying to focus on the feel of Sasuke's body instead of the searing pain of the stretch. A wet warmth licked under his eyes. He opened his eyes to see that Sasuke used his tongue to lick away his tears. Then Sasuke nuzzled his shoulder and whispered, "God, you're so tight," just as he bottomed out in him. He breathed heavily, trying to get used to having Sasuke completely sheathed in him. Even with the pain, he couldn't have felt more complete than he did right then. This was what he wanted. This was what he needed. And Sasuke was the only person who could have given that to him. Sasuke was the only one who could ever make him feel alive. The pain began to subside, and he wiggled to test his discomfort. There was still some, but it was more manageable than at first. "It's all right," he said next to the raven's ear. "You can keep going." Sasuke lifted from his shoulder and stared down at him with blown pupils. He withdrew an inch and rolled his hips back forward. A small yelp escaped him from the pain that racked up his spine, but he still slid his hands down the raven's sweat-slicked back into his waist, encouraging him to continue his actions. Sasuke then pulled out almost completely before thrusting back in. He screamed out, less from pain, more from the fullness and a small bit from pleasure. He dug his nails in the pale waist on the next thrust and moaned when the pleasure grew. His legs wrapped around Sasuke, lifting his hips and meeting each thrust once the last of the pain eased. "There!" he cried out as Sasuke hit a spot inside him that filled him with such pleasure he saw spots of white. "Keep hitting there." Pressure built each time Sasuke hit that spot, added with the slight friction his cock received being trapped between their bodies, and he was so close. He pulled Sasuke down and connected their lips, pouring all his emotion into it. The thrust became even harder, pulling a cry of pleasure from him. Sasu. I'm G-gonna, so see close. Sasuke reached between them, grabbed his cock, and began to stroke him. He arched off the bed, the pressure becoming unbearable and tensed as his orgasm hit him hard and fast. He vaguely heard a groan next to his ear before the body above him tensed and warmth filled him. Sasuke went lax, laying on top of him as they both tried to catch their breaths. Happiness soared through him, the like he's never known. He now belonged to Sasuke in every way, and if this was the last time he ever saw the Raven, at least he could remember and know he had one moment of happiness with the one he loved. If this was all he could have, then he wouldn't want it any other way. He carted his hand through Sasuke's hair, causing a hum to come from him and reverberate against his neck. "I love you," he whispered. Sasuke kissed his neck as he withdrew his member from his sensitive entrance. He winced, but still followed Sasuke when he rolled to the side and brought him along. He laid his head in contentment on the Raven's chest and closed his eyes. The rapid beat of his heart brought a smile to his lips as the sound acted like a lullaby and coaxed him into a doze. "I love you too." Those words snapped his wide awake, his smile falling down into a frown. No, Sasuke's not supposed to say that. He's not supposed to love him. He's supposed to hate him. Wasn't he? It would have made things easier. It would have made everything so much easier if this meant nothing to him. He bit his lip to stave off the tears gathering at the corner of his eyes. "Why can't you hate me?" He nuzzled closer to the pale chest, wishing the night wouldn't end. "Please just hate me." "Kit, wake up," a voice from what sounded far away said. "Come on, Kit, it's time to wake up." Naruto furrowed his brows as he slowly woke up. He cracked open his eyes, blinking a few times to get them focused from his sleepy haze. Confused, he wondered why he felt warm all over and why his pillow moved up and down. He slid his head upward and came face to face with Sasuke's sleeping face. He was protectively wrapped in his arms as the Raven slept soundly. He stared at Sasuke's lax features. He didn't think he's ever seen Sasuke look so at peace before. He always wore that scowl. He wished he could see more of this. "Kit, we have to go," Kurama interrupted softly. "It's almost sunrise." His head snapped toward the window, praying Kurama was wrong. He had to be, it was too soon. If he could have died from heartbreak, he would have died right then. Because even with the rain pouring down outside, he could still make out the faint colors blooming over the horizon. The colors of the rising sun. No, no, no. This can't be happening. Why did it have to be like this? Why? He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave him. Never him. He somberly turned back to Sasuke, wiping away the stray tear that fell with the back of his hand. But more fell. He lifted a terribly shaky hand and ghosted it down the side of Sasuke's face, making sure not to touch in fear of waking him up. He then quickly but soundlessly got out from the Raven's embrace and out of bed. He grabbed his clothes that were sprawled all over the floor and got dressed. All the while, he choked down the sobs that threatened to escape his mouth. Once dressed, he stood in the middle of the room and stared at the sleeping form of his lover. His feet would not move from the spot. He just wanted to lay back down into the warm embrace of the person he loved. But he couldn't. No matter how much he prayed to every god he could think of, nothing would change. This was reality. This was his hell. "Kit." He shut his eyes tightly in a vain attempt to hide from what he had to do. "Oh God, please forgive me," he whispered brokenly before he turned on his heels and ran out of the room, down the stairs and out of the house, leaving his life as Uzumaki Naruto behind. The only left behind was a single note laid on the pillow next to Sasuke. "Morning, team. You're probably wondering why I'm not there. Well, it's because I had a meeting with Sarutobi Gigi. Actually, I'm already running late, so I might want to make this quick. What I said before about how I felt about you, I wanted to make sure you knew I was serious. I love you. I love you more than I thought I ever would. What am I saying? I thought I would never love anyone. But then I fell in love with you, a stuck-up bastard. I'm not sure how that happened, But it did, and I don't regret any of it. I'll never regret it, because I'll always love you. I'm yours now, Sasuke. I'll always belong to you and no one else. You're dope, Naruto.